Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Jank Tank bonus episode number, I don't have it written down here. What is this, 12, 11, 13? It's in double digits, where one and a number after that.
It's the peasant episode of the new set.
Edge of Eternities Peasant Cube review as a bonus episode. Again, I don't know why I keep labeling these as bonus episodes. I think I just do it as an excuse to skip all the housekeeping stuff. But yeah, we don't do all the housekeeping stuff during the bonus episodes. And we're here to talk about Peasant Cube today. By the time you're listening to this, we've already done the Edge of Eternities mainline cube review with all the rares and mythics, and unfortunately the entirety of the bonus sheet with myself, Teld, and Chris. But as usual, we've got Daneelius on to replace Chris here for the peasant content, which means that we're talking about at least 35 extra cards we wouldn't have if it was just me and Teld. So Daneelius, welcome back. Welcome back.
You're
as
welcome
usual.
for that. Thanks for having me.
Yep. Quick reminder. I know minimal housekeeping. Find our Discord, the Jank Diver Game in Discord, wherever you're listening to this. You can find it in the description. Come join us. We're like 8 or 9 members away from hitting that 1,000 mark that I've been like striving for a while. So very excited about that. Come join in. Give us your take on the Peasant Cube content. Let us know the cards we misread, because we always misread a couple of them, or the cards that we just straight up miss, because there's always seems to be a white whale that we end up missing from the set for whatever reason. That's like an S tier card. But yeah, come join us in the Discord, the Jank Diver Game in Discord. And of course, you can find Daneelius in our Discord or the Limited Level Ups Discord, as well as finding his cube, the Daneelius's Peasant All-Star Cube on CubeCobra, which we draft sometimes in our server, so another reason to come join up. So we're skipping the single card discussion. We're skipping all the riff-raff at the beginning. I will ask a question up front, though, because myself and Teld have already kind of talked about the mechanics from a fundamental level and kind of gone in depth a little bit more on the mainline episode. But before we start just jumping into cards and talking about the grade and scale and all this stuff, I do want to ask you, Daneelius, what your opinion of spacecraft and the station mechanic is, because I think that's actually a pretty big deal for this set and might influence the way that we look at some of these cards.
Yeah, so I think it's right to see them kind of as battles more than they really are vehicles. I think a lot of people have been talking about them as kind of pseudo vehicles, but I really don't think most of the ways in which vehicles play matches up with spacecraft at all. They're a lot more station. They're a lot more like battles in the sense that they give you some upfront value, and then they say like, hey, tap your creatures to not attack your opponent, and you'll eventually get a little bit more value. The biggest difference between battles and spacecraft is that you can obviously tap your creatures with haste to reduce the station count on them, and then the other big one that I think the limited level up set review mentioned is that unlike battles, you don't have to get through with your attacks to be able to kind of raise up those charge counters on those cards, which means that if you're in an aggro deck that's kind of been stymied by your opponents and you don't have any attacks left, you still can hit the spacecraft. So in a way, they're like battles that probably play a little bit better than battles overall. That being said, there's still these expensive, slow objects that definitely in my mind will lead to kind of battlecruiser gameplay and kind of need a little bit of slow battlecruisery sort of gameplay to thrive. And for that reason, I don't really think any of them are very close to playable at all in Peasant.
Okay, so all the ones that I bring up today, you're going to shoot me down on them.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, good to know. I think we chatted just very briefly before this, but it seems like spacecraft should work in the retail limited, but once you translate it out of retail limited, it's kind of like, okay, well, yeah, I'm not really going to mess with this. There are a couple that I am interested in at the peasant level, but you might be right that just the mechanic and the numbers are clunky enough as a whole that it just doesn't matter for Cube. But I'll try to defend a few. Before we talk about the first couple cards here, I do want to remind everybody that we have a kind of like behind-the-scenes grade and scale, A through F, traditional limited resources grade and scale. Your A's are the best possible cards, the things that you'll pack one, pick one, and stuff like that. And it goes all the way down to F's, which are cards that we really don't talk about much in the context of this cube, because, why are we picking out F's to talk about when we can talk about anything from the set? We're not going to discuss our grade for every single card. In fact, I personally don't even have a grade on every single card here due to, time constraints and some extra cards that have been added to our show notes before kicking up the recording. So we will kind of highlight it whenever there's like a big difference between, individual grades, usually where I'm like a lot higher than Daneelius and Teld tend to be on certain cards. So, if it matters, like if the grade matters, we'll actually spell it out. But for the most part, we won't be actually discuss and are great on every single thing. And then the last thing to note, as usual, is that Daneelius and Daneelius's Peasant All-Star Cube is a little bit different than the Jank Gamen Peasant Cube. There's more focus on cheaper cards and aggressive / tempo strategies and stuff like that. There's more of an artifact focus across the entire cube, so he will be evaluating things in a slightly different context than Teld and I, though we're mostly trying to bring this together for like Peasant Cube as a whole rather than just our own individual experiences. So all that being said, I think we should jump into our cards because we've got a million to take care of, and I'm going to let Teld take the first one here actually because it's something that we discussed in the mainline episode, and I would like to see how your opinion differs here for the Peasant Cube. In fact, maybe I was the one who added this to the doc actually, because your guys' grades are pretty low on it.
Yeah, I actually didn't add this to the doc for Peasant, but it's Honored Knight Captain again. So it's 1 and a white for a creature human advisor knight. That's a 1/1, and it makes a 1/1 human soldier creature token when it enters play. For 4 and 2 white, you can sacrifice it, you search your library for equipment, put it onto the battlefield, and then shuffle. So in the mainline episode, I don't know if I hyped this card up, but I suggested that I thought the upside of it was better than Resolute Reinforcement for whatever that means. Here in the Peasant Cube, I don't quite feel like that because we don't have a Cryptic Coat, an Aegis, an Assimilation Aegis, or an Embercleave to go fetch. As much as I love Glimmerlight, spending 6 mana to go fetch my short sword isn't exactly inspiring joy. It's a little different when you can threaten to kill somebody or you can get like a powerful value engine or something like that. The equipment at Peasant is just a lot weaker. And I think the best you're going to be doing is something like Dragoon's Lance or Samurai's Katana, and that's just not really remotely worth spending that much mana.
Yeah, all fair. I mean, I'm more of a fan of the 2 mana make 2 bodies things, but they're never above sea level rate, even in decks that can utilize them very well. And I think everything you said is fine. You're not fetching up Embercleave, you're not fetching up Dissection Tools or Batter Skull or anything here, so there's not even like a big gotcha or anything like that. So unless you're playing whatever that Colossal Dreadmask card was or something like that, and you're really pushing equipment, I don't think it's actually that good. I think this was one of the first cards I put on the dock, and I was like, oh, this is a very cool card. I like the design of the card, but power level, probably not super strong. I didn't even grade it.
I think the one interesting thing about the card, though I agree with everything Teld said, is it's like a go wide card, except for it's not, because like the 2 abilities in a sense are at odds. Like most of the time, white go wide wants not to be sacrificing bodies to go get equipment. Like that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense in Peasant in my mind, unless you're thinking about this as more of like a white-black go white, like an attrition style go white card. Then it does kind of make sense that you're just sacrificing your 1 body to get potentially a job select card that makes multiple objects. So there's something there maybe, but really what I'm most interested with for this card is if we get a job select style equipment at some point that is actually like 4 go wide decks, like a job select equipment that makes multiple bodies or pumps your whole team or something like that, then I could imagine, especially in a smaller cube, looking to play this in your Resolute Reinforcement slot. But as is, I don't think it's kind of weird. It doesn't really make a ton of sense to me, given the current card pool.
Because if you sack it to go get, like, let's just say Dragoon's Lance, it's kind of almost like a 6-mana activated ability that just, like, put some counters on this card, right? You're sacking it to replace it with a marginally better creature, and that's not really as impressive as, like, a 6-mana ability should read. So I think we're all in agreement on that one. Daneelius, this next one I think was a U edition, though. I'm coming around on this card the more I read it. It is a little play-draw dependent, but it's a cool little card.
Yeah, this is Sunstar Expansionist, 1 and a white for a 2/3 human knight uncommon. When this creature enters, if an opponent controls more lands than you, create a lander token. And these are tokens kind of sprinkled throughout the set that are essentially rampant growth. You can pay 2 and tap them, sacrifice them, and get a basic onto the battlefield tapped from your library. And then it has landfall. Whenever land you control enters, this creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn. So it's a 2-mana 2/3 that kind of compares with cards like Glory Heath Lynx, the traveling botanist from TDM. Where, one of the general comments I would make on this card is just that we're just at the point now in Peasant where I think you kind of have to expect 5 points of power and toughness as the baseline for your 2-drops. And if you're not getting 5 points, then the card really needs to be doing something pretty impressive to justify its inclusion. Like just bears alone, it's harder and harder to justify those cards in my mind. It's also weird because the line of text, if an opponent controls more lands than you, at first you're like, okay, so on the draw, this card is really strong, but it's not really, because if you play this on turn 2 on the draw, you're still not getting the lander. The only way to get the lander is if you wait till turn 3 or turn 4, and if you do it on turn 3, you might be playing off curve, where like unless you have something to do with that third mana, then you're just kind of wasting the third mana. This becomes a 3-drop, and it's not that impressive as a 3-drop. I think most often the play pattern with this is going to be on the play. You play this as a 2-mana 2/3, and then for some number of turns it gets to attack as a 3/3. In which case it's just a worse Sundial Dawn Tyrant, which is the comp that I made here as a joke for you, Tim, because I know you hated that card. Yeah. And then on the draw, you're most often going to be waiting till turn 4 to play this, and I think given that kind of play pattern, I think it's just fine. It's not great, and really the issue is there's so many strong 2-drops now in white that I doubt, honestly, that I'm going to end up playing this. If you got the lander with more consistency, I think it would be really interesting as like a 2-drop creature that makes an artifact for all the artifact synergies and everything else that I care about. But I just think you're not going to make that lander token nearly as much as you might hope to. And so most often it's a 2-mana 2/3 that gets to attack as a 3/3 sometimes, and that's just a worse Sundial. So I don't think I'm adding it right now. I have it as like a C- level card. It's fine if you want to play with it, but I just think there are better 2-drops right now in Peasant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you've ever played with Knight of the White Orchid in any format, like you kind of know that sometimes you just got to run it out without getting the land, and then it's like, oh man, this could have been any sort of utility card instead. So it feels bad. It feels great when you get the land, feels terrible when you don't. So I do like the point of bringing up again the 2/3/3/2 being the new bear, because I do a lot of editing. In fact, my job is editing Magic articles, and sometimes people will still write something like, well, it's a 2-mana 2/2, so that's a good start. Talking about a standard card or a limited card. And I'm like, no, it's not. Like, that hasn't been a good enough start since like forever, or 3-mana 3/3 or whatever. Like, I'm expecting something more on top of that. And it seems like this set in particular just has a lot of 2-mana 3/2s and 2-mana 2/3s. And that kind of is the like new bear. I think that's a very good point to kind of like drive home these days, especially in cube environments. The next card, another one that, you brought up in the mainline cube, where we kind of waffled on it a little bit. Mostly I was like, this is a cool card if you're doing certain things, like maybe it can do some cool things at a higher power level. But for Peasant Cube, this is probably one of the clear best cards in the sets, I think. And
slam dunk.
Maybe there's not enough competition of clear best cards in this set, but it is a very good one.
Yep, so once again, we're talking about All Fates Stalker. It's 3 and a white for a 2/3 Drix Assassin. And when it enters, you exile up to one target non-assassin creature until this creature leaves the battlefield, and you could warp for 1 and a white. So in the mainline cube, we talked about the kind of narrow spaces in which you could play with this and potentially take advantage of it being kind of a blink removal spell, Banisher Priest hybrid card. Here in the Peasant Cube, though, it's Corph Skyfisher with extra steps. It's your blink effect with extra steps, and it's a Banisher Priest on top of it. And Banisher Priests are better here. They're not. I'm still not going to say they're amazing, because you don't love to hope that your Banisher Priest doesn't die, but given how many tokens float around in Peasant Cube, you can also target those a lot of times and then not have to worry about it. And so generally speaking, I think these cards play just a little bit better in Peasant, and I think the warp is going to be much like the value Durdley side of this card that really excites me is much more appealing here in Peasant, but you still have those options of just like clearing out a big green blocker that gets in the way or something like that.
Yeah, I think this card is really cool and very good. I definitely think it's the best card in the set. I think there's a little bit of the cap on the upside because it's a 2/3, and if you think about recently in Peasant, we have multiple different 1-mana removal spells in red, for instance, that can hit 3 toughness creatures. Obviously, Lightning Bolt just came to Arena, but there's Galvanic Discharge and Galvanic Blast and even Torch the Tower. And in black, there's Cut Down, and there's a lot of ways now for 1 mana, and definitely way more ways for for 2 mana to be able to nav a 2/3. And the fact that this costs 4, definitely I do think kind of limits its upside a little bit. Comparing this to something like Annex Entry, which is a 1/4, and I think a lot more difficult for your opponent to get any kind of a realistic mana advantage on with their removal. That part does limit the upside here a little bit. So I'm not quite as high as you guys are on the card, but I agree that the warp side of this is really the exciting part, in the sense that You can nab their token, or you can reset your own pixie and then, pick up your nowhere to run, and then this comes in and kills another thing. It's like the potential value chains, especially in white-black, to me are really exciting, to the point that I almost see this, at least in my environment, I'm kind of starting it as like a white-black gold card almost. Maybe not entirely, but like you think about this being another CubeCobra that, your black return spells are going to, really appreciate. So I think this card is very good. I don't know how much I'm really going to want it in, say, like white-red aggro, for instance, or even white-green aggro, but I think in any sort of an attrition style white deck, this is going to be really strong.
Yeah, and again, just to bring up the same note from the mainline cube, if you're playing with other warp cards, like in the retail format, the joke here is you warp in your other creature, and then you warp in this, and you blink that creature, and you get to just keep the full value creature. Probably not much of a consideration for cubes, though a lot of warp cards are really good. In fact, next card's a really powerful warp card that I wouldn't mind doing that with. But yeah, all Fate Stalker is one of the better kind of like standout uncommons from this set for sure, which we noted before recording. There aren't a lot of like A+ style cards in this set, which maybe is a good thing, but also like means there's more flat power level across the cards we're going to talk about. Starfield Shepherd, it looks like I'm way higher on this than, well, not way higher. I'm definitely higher on this than you guys, it seems. So Starfield Shepherd is 3 white for an uncommon 3/2 angel with flying. When it enters, search your library for a basic plains or a creature card with mana value 1 or less, reveal it and put it into your hand. Then shuffle, and it has warp for 1 and a white. So kind of like in line with the Delivery Moogle Micromancer style cards of like, make sure you have enough targets for this thing to fetch. I actually think this card's quite good. I've kind of like reevaluated it a couple times because I saw it originally. I was like, oh, this card's busted. And it's like, okay, it's not busted. But the way I'm thinking about this is it's a Planescycler that doesn't lose you the card, right? Like, think about that stupid Cloud Moogle from Final Fantasy, like the really unplayable Planescycling card. That was a 3-power flyer for 5 when it came into play, but that's kind of all it ever did. And it had Planescycling, so it had like a quote-unquote buyout. But can you imagine like if every land cycler, 2-mana land cycler that you played drew the card? Like you got to land cycle and also get the card later on? I think there's a lot of value in that, being able to like essentially plane cycle this, go get a basic planes, and then know that you also have this 5-drop that then will also draw you a 1-drop. And sure, you're drawing a 1-drop on turn 5 or whatever, but your Thraben Inspectors and stuff like that, your Dragonfly Pilots, they're still pretty impactful later in the game. And if you're good on lands, you can just go get the 1-drop right away if you warp this out early. I think that all adds up to what I think is a really powerful card. I mean, when all is said and done, it's a 3-for-1, right? Assuming you warped it, you got 2 extra cards from your library and also get this 3/2 flyer. And I'm not going to pretend like the body's amazing. It's double white. There's a lot of things to kind of like downplay it, but I do think this will play out as a powerful card. If you're just playing an attrition style match and someone warps this on 2, you just know that you're going to have to fight through a lot of resources. And it also guarantees that you get to play the game by just going and getting your planes. Obviously, if it could get any land or a dual land or something, it'd be a lot stronger, but basic planes is all it can grab. So I'm pretty high on this thing right now. I'm reading it as a plane cycler that does not lose you the material to go get your land, which I value that quite a bit.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty reasonable way to read the card. I mean, obviously your opponent could do stuff like counter it that they can't do to a land cycler, but I think that's pretty marginal. I'm just a little lower. I'm kind of in between you two in terms of it. I think it seems quite solid. I'm a little disappointed that given how much of a focus on artifacts there were, it didn't have or artifact on there so that it could kind of stack with the Delivery Moogle.
So we could go get Mishra's Bauble. Yeah, just say what you're feeling. Say what you're feeling.
I would never say that. But no, like there'd be cards like Scrabbling Claws and Portable Hole, and there's a few other cards in addition to Mishra's Bauble that you could go get. That being said, one thing that I do like about this card, and it kind of just occurred to me now, is that when you draft the card Heartfire Hero, which is another of my favorite cards, you tend to build your deck with hoping that you open Heartfire Hero in all of your deck, or in all of your draws.
Good point.
Everybody can take the drink because you mentioned Heartfire Hero now already.
I managed to hit Heartfire Hero, Mishra's Bauble, and don't worry, I got Core Skyfisher coming.
No, we already hit Core Skyfisher.
Well, I was going to hit it in this one when I talked about Nurturing Pixie being a card you could go get to pick this up.
Oh, no, there's a combo. Okay, I'm interested.
Yeah, but when you build your deck with Heartfire Hero in it, you tend to really want to draw your Heartfire Hero because it's a very powerful card, and you're usually not making a lot of concessions to it, but it will be like your best draw or one of your best draws in a lot of your hands. And having a functional second copy of it when your mana is working out, if you got 3 lands in play when you play this, you can just go get your Heartfire Hero. And that seems actually pretty appealing. So there's quite a bit of cards. I was thinking that the 1-drops wouldn't be that good, but honestly, all 5 of the white 1-drops we play all scale really well into the game as well. They're all just like fine draws in the late game. And so, I'm not going to say like your best draws, but they are good draws into the late game. And this fetches them up. And there's good 1-drops across the entire cube section at this point outside of green. I mean, like, you don't want to spend 5 mana to go get a mana dork, but it is better than nothing.
Yeah, I could be too low on this for sure. The fact that it does get the 1-drop does make it different than cards like Ambitious Farmhand and Clay-Fired Bricks and even Birth of Meletis. And like we have a lot of these cards at this point, I feel like, where it's like 2 mana, get a plains, and something more, like draw a card or just something else. Mm-hmm. And this might already be better than a lot of those, even if this only did get the plains. And the fact that this can get 1-drop certainly puts it in a different class. I do want to go back to something, though, that you said about All Fate Stalker, Tim, and it just kind of came to me. And I haven't thought about this for so long, honestly, that I didn't grade these cards thinking about this at all. But if you are playing a Blink package in your cube, then all of these cards get way better. Like if you're playing Ephemerate, for instance, and you go Starfield Shepherd into Ephemerate, or if you have Soul Herder in play, and you play this, and then you Soul Herder it before the warp trigger goes off, like that's all really strong. So I think there's definitely some environment considerations, and honestly, like I could even imagine a world, because there's maybe 5 or 6 warp cards that we're going to talk about that I think are reasonably playable in cube. I could imagine that you get enough of these in here that you try to add in more of the kind of blink and flicker synergies that I've been taking out over the last 6 months to year and a half, just because I feel like it's not really what Magic's been about lately. But this is the first mechanic in a long time that really is screaming for cards like Ephemerate. So especially if you're playing with those cards, I think these are all like, all of these cards get way better. And this one especially, like Ephemerating this on turn 3 sounds really powerful.
Yeah, the next 2 cards, in fact, also have warp. So four white cards with warp just by themselves. It's a strong mechanic. It's just cheat out big creature early, so if you can manipulate, then that's like Up the Beanstalk is also worth noting. Like these expensive warp cards that cost 1 or 2 mana to get out, but trigger Up the Beanstalk is a big deal. So yeah, blink is like probably the most broken thing you can do with it.
I was gonna say it's interesting too because it gives a little more value towards Raise Dead style effects than just directly reanimating some of these cards into play. Which I think is interesting because I think generally speaking, Raise Deading is a downside outside of like the rare cast triggers, compared to just, dumping it into play with a reanimation effect. But usually the Raise Deads are really good. They push the actual effect of the card, but just the mechanic of the Raise Dead effect, of putting it from the graveyard into your hand versus graveyard to play is just worse. Sure. But here, with these kind of cards, because you can only warp them from your hand, you can double dip in value again and just keep rolling.
Yeah, or dare I say, like Skyfishers or anything, like you might actively choose to warp something instead of paying the full cost if you have the choice. Like the Riddler, that Quantum Riddler thing that we saw in the mainline cube. There are times where you could hard cast that card, but you would just choose to warp it instead. Last note on Starfield Shepherd I wanted to make: if you're playing X cost creatures or X spells that have a mana value of 0 or 1, like I can't think of any that we're playing right now, but like an Ugins. Diva, I don't know what the card is.
Conjuring or whatever it is.
Yeah, you guys know what I'm talking about. Like a green X creature, you can go fetch those as well, and then follow up with an actual big thing instead of like a real 1-drop. So,
hear that, people? You can go get your Contortionist troop.
Yeah, there you go. Daneelius, it looks like a quick hit on the next one here is another warp card to talk about.
Yes, this is Night Luminary, 3 and a white for a 3/2 human knight common. When this creature enters, create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token, and it has warp for 1 and a white. So I added this late, but in part because I was just thinking about the potential for a bunch of different warp cards getting added, and the more warp cards in your environment, I do think the better that this gets, because you're going to be incentivized to be playing with other things that that work well with warp, again, like Ephemerate, like Soul Herder, etc. And I think it was the limited level ups set review where they brought up that this is kind of a spirited companion in a way, because you warp it for 2, you get a 1/1, and the card you draw is Night Luminary. Now, Is that card on the same par as the average card in a cube? It might be slightly below, but there's also other things you can do with this card that make it, more modal than a Spirited Companion. I'm also not playing Spirited Companion anymore, but the point is I don't think this card is far off from general playability in a cube. And if, again, you are abusing things like Ephemerate or other ETB type synergies, then this makes a lot more sense to me. So it's not a card that I'm planning on adding, but I don't think it's like super far off the mark, and I'm not playing any of the Blink stuff right now. So something to keep in mind, the more warp cards you add to your environment, I think this probably gets more reasonable.
How far off were we from getting a 2/2 on this? I know that would be too good right now, but like, would it be too good a year from now?
On a common, it feels like that's too free, but I could see it definitely being like a pushed uncommon or something. Like, I don't know. They reserve that sort of thing for rares, right? Like the...
Oh, sure. I'm not actually even looking... I haven't looked at a single rarity symbol on any of these cards. I'm very real with you. It's either a common or an uncommon. It's all the same for me.
Sure. Yeah, I think that 3/3 and 1/1 is like the base rate we get for common these days. And so, we lost a point of toughness for the warp. And so, yeah, if you're not abusing that, then yeah, this is definitely understated. And I think we certainly will be getting a 4-mana 3/2 and 2/2 sooner rather than later.
Mm-hmm. What is the interaction with Starfield Shepherd? Did you mean All Fate Stalker, the Blink guy?
Sorry, that's what I meant. Yes, the All Fate Stalker gets better with warp cards in general. So if you're playing that and you're playing like 4 other warp cards, so maybe you add in a couple more. Maybe you add in Soul Herder back to your cube. If you took that out a while ago, it's like there's something here potentially.
Okay, I was just like, I don't understand how this works with the Angel, but...
Card names are not my specialty, as we've learned up to this point. Okay.
Well, speaking of which, what about Beyblade Trooper?
Yeah, right. Beyblade Trooper is 2 and a white for a human soldier, 2/2, uncommon. When this creature enters, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Whenever a non-token creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it dies, create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token, and it has warp for 1 and a white. So the card that this really reminded me of, and I was trying to place it because it read to me as really powerful, and I wasn't seeing a lot of people talking about it. And I was like, there's some card that this reminds me of, and I figured out it's Basri's Lieutenant, which was a rare from, I want to say, M20, I think, 21. Maybe M21, which was a 4-mana 3/4 vigilance that has almost all the same text as this, except for you get a 2/2 and token instead of a 1/1, and it counts any creature dying, not just non-token creatures dying. This has the upside
from Multicolor.
Sorry, my bad.
This can target itself.
This can target itself, absolutely. And the fact that you can warp with this ability in play and make your attack much better, or potentially sacrifice a creature or whatever to make a 1/1, like that's a less common play pattern. But I just see this as being both very usefully modal while also being very reasonable on its face as just 3 worth of stats that also makes more stuff, can synergize with both token decks and +1/+1 counter decks. Like, this seems a great white-green card to me, whichever way you're going. So I don't know exactly if it clears the bar of 3-drop. One thing I was going to talk about earlier on is what you were saying, how there's not really that many standout cards in this set, and there's very few cards that I'm like slam dunk adding to my cube. This is just one of a long list of cards that to me is like perfectly reasonable to add. I can't really come up with a good reason why this isn't playable. It's just not screaming out to me to be played. So, I'm going to have to curate a list of 25, 30 cards that I want to try for the season. I think this could be on it. I think it's doing plenty to get added to cube.
Yeah, I like it a little better having realized it can target itself. I mean, I kind of thought it was fine, but like I just mentally inserted another target creature you control. Yeah, this is interesting. I was mostly just disappointed that it had non-token on there because I thought this would have been super cool with completed Huntmaster, since the cards that you could like go up value every time.
Can I sell you on this curve? Turn 1 mouse, turn 2 warp this, put a counter on your mouse. Do you like that?
You can absolutely sell me on that. Yeah, sold. Yeah, good.
Attack for
like
15 or whatever.
Yeah, we're just attacking for like 20 on turn 2. Yeah, this is cool. I do want to take this moment to mention, we haven't really talked about it in this episode, and in the mainline review, it wasn't quite as bad, but of the like 6 cards we've talked about, do you want to guess how many of them are like dudes in spacesuits?
The white creatures are very consistent across the board. Same when the blue jellyfish too are like tripping me up a little bit, but at least this one's called Beyblade Trooper.
I've heard that the story or like the theming, the lore for this set is actually pretty good. I've not dipped my toe in, but I've heard that it's well done. I can't comment though.
It's the best lore no one will ever read.
I was gonna say, you don't strike me as a lore master for MTG.
Not so much. Yeah, not so much.
Okay, so yeah, a lot of really cool warp creatures there. We'll see which ones actually make the cut and which ones don't. Moves us into some white spells with maybe a banger? I don't know. So Scout for Survivors is 2 and a white for an uncommon sorcery. Return up to 3 target creatures with total mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Put a +1/+1 counter on each of them. So this reads like it's insanely powerful. But we played with this card before. We played with a Patch Up, right, from Streets of New Capenna. I think it was the exact same text minus the +1/+1 counters. And I remember my recollection is always being disappointed with that card. Like, could never, like, the dream is get back 3/1/1s, whatever. Like, here's my 3-for-1 for 3 mana. Never comes together. A lot of times what you end up doing is having to just fire this off on the only 2-drop in your graveyard, and it doesn't feel like you're getting full value. And then with Patch Up, it was like, okay, you could pay 3 mana to get back a 3 mana creature, and it was like, sure, like I unearthed the lowest possible thing I could get.
We do that for 2 mana now.
yeah, you get much stronger ways to do that exactly. So what you want to be doing is getting back multiple creatures, whether it's a 3/1/1s or a 2/1 and you guys know what I'm saying, a 2 mana creature and a 1 mana creature. That being said, if you do get back a bunch of 1 mana creatures, this card's kind of insane. It's just I have it at B-. I probably should knock it down to the C range because I know better that this does not hit its ceiling often enough for me to be that excited about it. But I do think if you fire this off on a 3-drop, getting at least a +1/+1 counter on the deal is a nice upside too. So it's not as, feel bad as like Patch Up was when you had to fire that off on a 3-drop.
Yeah, this effect is just your Coral Sword, right? I knew Coral Sword wasn't going to be good, and I wanted to talk about how it was good.
Did you see Strictly Worse Coral Sword in this set?
I did see Strictly Worse Coral Sword.
Yeah, this is my Coral Sword. I love these white small ball reanimator type cards.
Yeah, I think that it's best in class clearly, which is something to note. I think that +1/+1 counters, like extra power and toughness in play, is one of the easiest ways to take an effect like this that's marginal and turn it into something really good. Like I think about the black reanimation spell that, of course, I'm not going to remember the name of, but the 5 mana reanimate that lets you explore twice on the creature that got reanimated, defossilize. And like defossilize played way better than a lot of the other 5 mana reanimates we'd seen because you get counters or you get some amount of value in addition to what you're doing. The funny thing here is that it kind of turns this card into one where when it's bad, it's still kind of bad. Like at its worst, you're only getting 1 creature back and it gets 1 counter. And that was already the worst case for this style of card in the past. And now it's like, okay, but when this card is good, it's insanely good. And so it's kind of, increasing the range of variability on this card. The biggest problem with cards like this is they're bad opening hand cards, and that's just always going to be the case. Like this does not solve the problem of this being a card you don't really want to see in your opening hand. But as a top deck, it's going to be ridiculous. So I think given the fact that it's just best in class, and I think that the cards you mentioned, like Patch Up, Dewdrop Cure is another one that, are close to playability, but for me don't really quite get there. The fact that this is clearly best in class means you should try it and see if it feels good. But don't expect it to be a card you want in your opener. I don't think it'll play well in the opener.
Yeah, I feel like the first time you hit like a Zach Fair or a Heartfire Hero off of this, though, you're going to feel like a king.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, another card worth reconsidering that I haven't thought about in a while is Call of the Death Dweller. That's another one in these lines that I was just thinking of. That was like, I think it was get back total mana value 3. It might have been get back a 1-drop and get back a 2-drop. I don't remember, but you get to distribute some Death Touch, Menace counters, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So
it is funny though. Every time we see these effects, I'm reminded of how completely nutty Back for Seconds is.
Oh, yeah. Back for Seconds, that lets you put a more expensive creature back into play while drawing an extra card. Yeah.
So, yeah, call was max 2 creatures, which is, one more thing on this card.
Up to 2 with mana value 3.
With mana value 3 or less, yeah. So,
sure.
I do think that's actually an important thing to note with this card is that your environment definitely matters for cards like this. The more 1-drops you have in your environment, the better these cards get. So, if you're somebody who doesn't like playing tons of 1s, or if you have way more 2s than 1s, this card's going to be worse. If you have a ton of 1s, this card gets better.
Mm-hmm. What do you guys think of this next one? So Reroute Systems is a single white mana for an uncommon. It's uncommon. That's probably a little bit of a signal about it, but it's an instant. Choose 1. Target artifact or creature gains indestructible until end of turn, or deal 2 damage to a target tapped creature.
We're getting one of these almost every set now, which in a way is a bummer because it just means, all right, I've got 7 different Lauren's Escapes to choose from for this slot in your cube. I think that's kind of the place we're at right now. is this better or worse than the last 7 that we've gotten? The fact that you don't get any of that extra value on top of the protection means it's not as good of a protection spell as the other ones that we've seen lately, like Lauren's Escape, which gives you a Scry 1. But this gives you modality. Now, I'm a known hater of modality, unless the modes are both like pretty much exactly what you're expecting to get for the mana you're spending. How good is deal 2 damage to target tapped creature? Given the fact that there's so many 2-mana 2/3s, I think it's never been worse than it is right now. So, I think you can play with this instead of Lauren's Escape, instead of the one we had in the last set, instead of the 7 that we've gotten in our last 7 sets. I don't think there's a massive difference, honestly. But I do think that if you're firing off a protection spell and you're not getting value on top of that protection, then it's just not, generally speaking, going to feel very good for you. So I think this is a weak protection spell. It's a weak removal spell. Does the modality get it there? Maybe, but it's probably worse than Lauren's Escape for me.
Yeah, I don't think either mode of this is particularly impressive. Like, we run Crumb and Get It, and the protection not giving hexproof on that does come up more often than you'd like to admit. And a deal 2 is fine, but because they have to already be tapped, I don't know, like it's not gonna, it's gonna get you in trouble sometimes. I think it's fine. This card is okay. It doesn't spark. This is not the kind of card that sparks joy for me.
Well, that's a big deal. Is like, how often are people like, for my environment, you're taking the Lauren's Escape in the kinds of decks like blue-white tempo, for instance, where you have maybe a Sheltered by Ghosts and you're playing at instant speed, and it's like just protect the queen and try to get across with flyers, whatever. And okay, that's if you're playing Lauren's Escape style cards in those decks, is this card going to get played in more decks? And there I'd be like, no, not really. It's like the fact that it's a removal spell isn't going to open up additional avenues of play for this card. It just means that in the places it was going in already, it has some extra modality, but like, how important is that? Probably not very. So yeah, I just don't think it matters very much.
Yeah, especially when the downside is, instead of Lauren's Escape keeping your Sheltered by Spooks guy alive, it gets bounced by, the unsummon they play, and because he doesn't give hexproof. Totally. And now you lose the game because of that. I think that is more meaningful downside than the upside of occasionally getting to shoot something for 2 damage, if that's the reason you're playing the effect.
Agreed.
How sold would you be if this was choose 1 or more?
Oh, choose 1 or more? Then I'd say it's awesome. I'd say it's extraordinarily good and a slam dunk inclusion. Then it's like, yeah, that would make it like a B-.
It would just be like 1 mana getaway glamour for small stuff.
1 mana win combat every time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, next card. I'm actually very excited about this, but I don't actually know if it's the type of card that's worth the cube equity. So, Honor, single white mana for an uncommon sorcery. Pretty simple. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, draw a card. And notably, that does have to resolve for you to draw a card. They kill your creature out from underneath it. You don't cantrip. So immediately comes to mind Defiant Strike, which I think is significantly weaker. So reading this card, it's a very simple card. It's not that hard to kind of like game out how something like this would play. My gut tells me that this card is actually very powerful, but like I kind of have to walk that back a little bit because like there's a ceiling to it, right? It's free, sure, it's free equity for the most part, but there's small risk involved, and it's only a +1/+1 counter. So it's just that it cantrips makes me feel like, okay, this is gonna push an attack at almost no cost, and then if you have some extra synergies and stuff, it's even better. So I do want to walk back. I think this card is amazing, or something like that too. I think this card is pretty good, especially if you care about anything that it can do beyond, just the text written on the card. If you care about +1/+1 counters, if you care about flurry, if you care about casting spells in white, prowess, if you care about, 1 mana spells, whatever. If you care about anything other than just the actual written text, I think this card can be quite powerful. Plus, I think it's Eli Manaya has been doing art for Magic recently. Keeps knocking it out. That Eli Manaya art from Tarkir Dragonstorm was also very good. Very standout art.
Yeah, I think, this makes your Heartfire Hero into a 3/3, so I'm in for it.
Every time. You can go get this with Micromancer? Like, come on.
I know what I like, okay?
Things that I like about this card, the art is cool. The fact that it's a one name, like Honor, like that's cool that we still have a few words like that left to put on cards. I like that it costs 1 mana. The art is cool. My issue is that if you're sitting down at a draft and this card is in the pack, I think for you to take this card, you have to be excited about some of the words on this card. Like you're either excited about draw a card because you're playing with Mischievous Mystic, or you're excited about the +1/+1 counter because you're playing with +1/+1 counter themes, even if the card is quote unquote good enough without synergies, I just don't think people are going to put it in their decks because it's just so kind of whatever. Yeah. And so I think that if you are playing around with those synergies, if White often cares about counters or drawing cards, then this is definitely worth adding. A concern that I have is like, what Go Wide deck is ever playing this card ever? So I mean, if Go Wide is a massive theme for you in White, then this kind of relegates Honor to, you know, less playability than you might think. So I think the card is actually probably pretty good, and the stats on it in the coming format might be awesome for all I know. I just don't think it's the kind of card that people are going to take without synergies.
Okay, hear me out though. It's 1 mana spell for your Clarion Spirit in your Go Wide deck. I also don't think you're required to, or not required. I don't even think you're obligated to have every card, like, you don't have to have all your cards work for every deck, right? Like, if a Go Wide deck doesn't want this, that just means the deck that does can get it.
You do need decks that want it, though. Like,
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, you do. You need decks that want it, but not every deck needs to want it.
Yeah, that's like the rabid null thing, right? Like, it's like red creature decks want that card, red spells decks not so much.
Well, and I guess part of what I'm saying is that there are cards that people will take disregarding their synergy that aren't even necessarily super powerful, that are just kind of bread and butter cards for Peasant. And my argument is that I just don't think people will see this card as a bread and butter card because it's not like a 2-drop. It's not a creature, it's not a removal spell. It's an extra thing and that you need to throw into one of your extra slots. And those slots tend to get taken up by synergy pieces in my mind. It's like I have a hard time imagining people taking this card unless they're really excited about one of the lines on this card for synergy in their deck, even if it's good enough to run on its own.
And if I saw it in a cube that I was drafting, I would assume those synergy things exist. Like,
right. Yeah, I think there's definitely something here. I don't know. I think the biggest argument does end up being the cube equity thing of is it worth the slot that it's competing with for something else, even if the words on the card are good. I agree with all that.
So maybe just worth an, if you will, an honorable mention. Thank you. Please clap. Next up, Seam Rip is single white mana for an uncommon enchantment. When it enters, exile a non-land permanent an opponent controls with mana value 2 or less until this leaves the battlefield. That's pretty much the exact same text. I think literally the exact same text on Portable Hole, with the only difference being that this is an enchantment with better art and instead of being an artifact.
Yeah, the fact that it's not an artifact makes it way worse for my particular environment, and I would argue it probably makes it way worse for most environments than Portable Hole. I think there's two things we're thinking about here. One is, do you just want more one-man interaction? I think that's something totally justifiable. The fact that this can hit a token and then get picked up very cheaply by your pixie and replayed, like all that stuff matters. And if you just want more Portable Holes, I think Portable Hole is very good. And so if you just want more of those in your environment, then I think this is fine to add. The second thing to think about is, we are getting more and more and more enchantments that are kind of doing things in a similar space as artifacts have been for the past couple of years. And maybe, I brought this up, I think last year, like, the idea of like an enchantment module coming out of Duskmourn, because we're getting a lot of enchantment cards. We're getting more and more of those types of cards. Maybe we're getting closer to that being a reality. The problem is tokens aren't enchantments. And so it's going to be harder in my mind to really build a consistent theme around it. But if you're trying to just build enchantments as a white-blue theme or, white-black theme or something like that, then cards like this could be very relevant because these are bread and butter cards that are going to go great in every deck. Like I think Seam Rip is eminently playable regardless of your strategy. It's just kind of outclassed in my environment by Portable Hole.
Daneelius over here pretending like he's never heard of glimmers and rolls.
Good, yeah.
Roll tokens, yeah, of course. Teld, did you add Focus Fire to the list here?
I did, yeah, because I saw this one and it kind of raised my eyebrow, and I had to double check on Scryfall, and I'm pretty sure I searched it correctly. Focus Fire is a single white mana for an instant, and it deals X damage to target attacking or blocking creature, where X is 2 plus the number of creatures and or spacecraft you control. Just ignore the spacecraft line. I believe this is the most effective / efficient highest ceiling version of this effect outside of a single alchemy card. And its comparisons I had were like Outflank and Elspeth Smite, and Elspeth Smite's more consistent in exiles, so like a little bit different, but this is strictly better than a card like Outflank, and most of the other versions of this effect cost 2. Now, and also a lot of them don't have the do extra damage in addition to the number of creatures. It's usually entirely conditional on creatures. Not a card I want to run, just a card that I'm pretty sure this is best in class for this specific effect. Daneelius, you might be able to correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, I wouldn't run it over a card like Kabira Takedown or Case of the Gateway Express, but in terms of just efficient for what the actual text in the box does, it's pretty close to the most efficient version of the effect, I think.
Yeah, I mean, kind of. Like, I think if you're comparing it with Elspeth's Smite or with Joust Through, I think is the other one that deals 3 damage to an attacking or blocking creature. That you can't really, I guess, call this best in class, period, because the floor is 2. And I think I believe Elspeth's Smite exiles, which is another pretty big
it does, yes.
Upside. So yeah, I mean,
also has better art.
Yeah, and it's not a permanent. And it'll, in general, my problem with Smite and Joust Through style effects is the attacking or blocking line. Like the nice thing that we didn't bring up about which one was it? Reroute Systems that we were talking about before, the protection spell that can also deal 2 damage to a tapped creature. The tapped creature line, in my opinion, is much better than attacking or blocking, because most of the time the upside of using your removal spell on a blocking creature is pretty minimal. It can come up, but it's not really what you want to be doing, as in the aggro deck, is like spending your mana to remove a creature that's blocking already, unless you have trample. So I strongly prefer the tapped creature line to attacking or blocking, and so I would need to get a lot out of an attacking or blocking only removal spell to be excited about it, and this doesn't quite do it for me.
Yeah, it doesn't do it for me either. I just wanted to mention it because I was pretty sure that it was. I mean, like, I assume you're going to have at least one creature in play most of the time. If you don't, you're in pretty dire circumstances. So pretty unheard of rate in terms of what you're getting. But again, compared to like what you would actually run, this is where it gets a little complicated or a little murky in terms of like what best in slot means. Because like this is definitely worse than Case of the Gateway Express or Kabira Takedown.
Yeah. I bet this plays well in the retail limited format. These cards have been performing pretty well lately. That's it for white. You know what we didn't actually talk about at all in white? Spacecraft. Not a single spacecraft, because they all suck. Let's see if we can get one in
reanimate.
blue, though.
You didn't want a 6-mana reanimate? All right. Sorry.
Oh, reanimate an enchantment or whatever?
I don't know.
No, I don't want that at all.
Can I interest you in a 3-mana Raise Dead that if you invest an additional like 10 power into, you get 3/2?
Yeah, it has lifelink though. It has lifelink. Yes, you can interest me in that one. Not for cube at all though. So starting off blue, we got a jellyfish scientist. It's Uthros Psionicist. 2 in a blue for a 2/4 uncommon jellyfish scientist. The second spell you cast each turn costs 2 generic mana less to cast. Notably, the blue-white theme of Edge of Eternities is double spelling or flurry or whatever. I'm totally out on this card, but I'm willing to hear an argument about it.
I added it, so I'll make the quick argument for it. So I don't know. I don't know about this card. I'm not saying it's for sure bang or anything. There's 2 things that interest me about it. One is the body size. So 2 in a blue for a 2/4 is not something we have seen much. We have seen it a couple times in the last 2 years. I think this is the third, I want to say, 3-mana 2/4 that we've gotten. The previous have not had abilities that were good enough to really increase their value over the 3-mana 2/4-ness of it. So the question is, how good? Number one, how good is the ability? Number two, are you even interested in the 3-mana 2/4? Which I think it's valid to question whether you're even interested in that. The ability, though, is also best in class. So it's kind of 2 intersecting things here that has me interested. One is the body size being pretty close to best in class for what we've gotten for blue cards over time. And then the ability also being best in class for what we've gotten for this style of ability. We've gotten second spell you cast each turn costs 1 less to cast a couple times, but this is the first time we've seen 2 less to cast on a Peasant 3-drop like this. So, how are you taking advantage of this? You can double spell with this on turn 4 with this and another 3-drop. You can potentially just play this on 3, and then on turn 4 pass your mana and you cast too expensive instance like a counter spell plus a draw spell or something like that. I think there's something there, but it doesn't have an ETB. It's a 3-drop that doesn't attack well. Oftentimes in my blue decks, I really want to be holding up my mana on turn 3, so I'm not at all trying to argue that you should definitely be playing this, but I always try to flag cards like this where it's doing something that we haven't really seen before. Will this be enough? Who knows?
Mana Crypt, eh?
I mean, it turns Mistress Bauble into Mana Crypt. It's great.
I bet if someone casts this against me in a cube, I'm like, okay, I can't ignore that. But I bet when you're the person casting it, a lot of times it's just like one of those things where you're like, okay, I have to fire this off on 3, and then I'll have a good turn next turn, and then they deal with it, and it's like,
Well, one of the nice things is, in addition to Mistress Bauble, you could play this into like a Prophetic Prism style card. Like the more 2-mana artifacts, colorless cards in your cube, the better this gets.
My god, this makes Glimmerlight cost 0 mana on curve.
Yeah,
it does.
Makes your Glimmerlight playable.
Oh wait, and so actually hold on 4 mana. So on 4 mana, hear me out. On 4 mana, we can just cast this and then cast another 3-drop, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Presumably.
you
Yeah.
Okay, I'm convinced. This card might actually be pretty good.
It's not necessarily the power level of the card that I'm off of. It's more of the like, what am I supposed to do with this factor of it? And it's like, I guess you can do things with it. Like maybe it's control slop whatever that like just doesn't indicate a deck or anything, and it just happens to be good there. But I don't know, if I get bodied by this in the retail limited format, I don't think I'll be that surprised, and then maybe I'll come around to the like, that's just a lot of cost reduction. But as it stands, I'm like, I don't know, it's not something I've ever really wanted in a blue creature, so maybe I just haven't played with this sort of thing before.
Okay, I got a line for you. Turn 2, you foretell Seryl's Packmate. Turn 3, you cast this. Turn 4, you cast your Seryl's Packmate and then cast your 4-mana green creature.
Or we plot Highway Robbery, turn 3 this, turn 4 Highway Robbery into Oliphants.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I mean,
Wow.
yeah,
We broke it.
I think okay. So if you're looking, because I agree with you, the question is like, where the hell are you playing this? I think there's an intersection of maybe two decks. One is stuff like you're talking about, where you're trying to abuse double spelling for some end. Maybe that end is Wingblade Disciple or Clarion Spirit, or drawing multiple cards a turn off of Mischievous Mystic, like we talked about in that last episode. That there's some crossover between drawing multiple cards a turn and casting multiple spells a turn. There might be something there, and then the other place is with artifacts, because assuming you have some number of colorless artifacts in your cube, then this is going to play at its best with those cards, because that makes it most likely for you to be able to actually double spell on 3 with this. So I think there are some places where you will be happy to play this card, and it is doing a new thing. I don't know if those combined justify a slot, but it's interesting.
I could totally buy the artifact line there, because we've seen cards before, usually Simic cards that are like, I don't know, what are their names? Weaver of Currents, Gyre something, Gyre Scientist, Gyre Sage, like 3-mana dudes that just tap for like blue-green or tap for colorless, and like that's presumably what you want out of this, but this doesn't have to tap, and it has a much more significant body. Those cards were like 1/1s and 2/2s. So maybe I am getting talked up a little bit on it. Still, maybe not enough to be like, yeah, I want to play this in my 360 cube, but maybe I'm underselling how good it is.
I think the thing about this that I'm kind of getting on here is that if you play this on turn 3, like if your opponent plays this on turn 3 and you have a removal spell, are you ever not pulling the trigger? Because I'm not letting my opponent untap with this. And so, like, in a way, it's like 3 mana, your opponent discards 1 removal spell from their hand. The other option is on turn 4, the double spell with 2/3 drops is honestly pretty good as a way to catch up. Like, I mean, like, obviously it's a bad top deck because, you're out of stuff, presumably out of stuff to do. But, 2 mana reduction is just a lot of reduction.
Maybe there are, like, flashback spells where, like, think twice, just as an example, like, is basically 3 mana to cast both halves or something. There might be something
for on turn 4,
And I really want to undersell the pass the turn to your opponent, and now you have a counter spell plus removal spell or something like that, and you can do both. Like I think there's something there.
Yeah, or on 4 mana, like counter spell plus my 4 mana draw 2 or whatever. Like that does actually seem pretty strong. Yeah, maybe there might be something here actually. That is a lot of cost reduction, and it's attached to a decent body. So maybe I'll come around on that one.
Yeah, I came in ready to meme on it, but I think you actually sold me.
Code Cracker Hound, which Daneelius had the nerve to give a C when it's so very clearly a B. Look at this guy. Code Cracker Hound.
I wanted to give it a D for dog, but that felt unreasonable.
An R for robot. 2 and a blue for a 2/1. When this creature enters, look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand and the other into your graveyard. That text might sound very familiar, because it was literally the text of Sig Appraiser in Tarkir Dragonstorm, which I think the data, capital D, said was the best blue common, and probably was just the best blue common. But this is literally the same exact card, except it also has warp for 2 and a blue, which sometimes you don't have the luxury of like warping this and just not adding to the board and getting the extra
sometimes
card.
You do.
But sometimes
you do.
Yeah, sometimes you're just playing against an opponent who's also dirtling and playing 3 mana 2/4s or whatever, and it's like, okay, I'll just get an extra card out of my Sig Appraiser. So yeah, it's a cantrip creature with a little bit of selection that fills the graveyard, and you can actually just cash it in for an extra card earlier in the game and get the body later.
Yeah, I'm going to let Daneelius talk about this because he rated it a good bit lower than Tim and I did. But, like, we're on Sig Appraiser, and it's looked okay, and this is just strictly better, and it's cute.
All right, well, first of all, on it being cute, I don't know if you noticed, this thing has like 8 legs, and if you read the flavor text, it's cringy as heck. So that's,
I did not notice that.
A very large downgrade in my mind to this card. But just talking about the mechanics, so I've talked before about environment differences. Blue is blue and green are the 2 worst colors in my cube. The gap between those two and the multicolors is large, and if blue is in a situation in my environment where it can pay 3 mana to like sleight of hand and not impact the board, then that I don't know if I've ever seen that situation come up in the history of my cube. So I think that the warp cost on this is totally fake, and this is basically just Subsic Appraiser, which I think is like a C. It's like a C. It's a fine card, and I think Appraiser is a fine card, but I just don't see the warp on this mattering like hardly at all. But there's environment differences, and the slower your environment is, the more likely you're going to be able to do the warp. Then I can see
I don't want to live in a world where I can literally never warp this card.
Yeah, Daneelius, I usually agree with you that limited is getting way too grindy and slow and soupy, but if you can literally never do this, then that just doesn't sound fun.
Maybe not never, but yeah, rarely.
Yeah, I would say this is not something you're going to frequently do in our cube, I don't think, but it is something that will definitely come up at least once or twice in a draft.
Dude, I will lay down and die before I give up the extra card. I could be at 10.
That is my personal thoughts on it as well.
I could be at 10 with no blockers.
For the sake of the viewers, I can't say that.
My bad. That's the other reason why I have to downgrade it, is because people are going to warp it way too much, and so it's going to play out way more poorly than it actually should.
I'm not a data stan at all, but I bet this has got to be one of those like way better in the hands of the best players type cards or whatever. Like, well, although this
card's gonna end up being worse than Subsic Appraiser because you have the option to misplay.
Yeah, the functionality separates the boys from the men.
I'm on Serum Visionary. I think I can. There's a chance that I'll play this over Visionary. The thing we haven't talked about, the reason why I didn't play Appraiser, is 2/1. 2/1 is so unacceptable. So, but yeah, I can see there being definite upsides over Visionary with this, and I could run it. I didn't give it a bad grade. Sure. I give it a C. I think it's a totally fine card.
Yeah. I do have to give you some credit on the one toughness thing, because we just did a draft review earlier today where I drafted a playful shove over a spring-loaded Sawblade in my artifact deck.
Yeah, I don't mind the X1 thing as much when you're already talking about a cantrip creature. It's like, okay, you nullified my 2/1. You didn't 2-for-1. You didn't like 2-for-1 me or whatever. So
sure.
it does matter. It does matter, but it's not on a cantrip creature. I don't care as much. Giga Chad Titan.
Yeah, so Giga Chad Titan
A++, huh? That's an aggressive grade.
Okay, so it's a 2-mana 4/4. With no text.
Is that even good?
If you just always open Mishra's Bauble, you get a 2-mana 4/4. I know Daneelius was excited about Sundial, and this is strictly better Sundial when you just always open Mishra's Bauble.
Exactly.
I mean, the 3-mana squid guy into this that makes this a 1-mana 4/4, right? Like, on turn 4, You go that into this, I guess. Anyway, he didn't read the card. Gigastorm Titan is 4 and a blue for a 4/4 elemental, and it costs 3 less to cast if you've cast another spell this turn. So it will be a 2-mana 4/4 as long as you cast something before it.
Yeah, and I generally hate these cards that are like, jump through some hoop, and then you get a mana reduction as the payoff. So I'm not at all trying to say this card is amazing. I give it a D+/C-. But, big but, okay, it's blue. It is blue, and it's big, and I think that the requirement is fairly easy for blue to satisfy. And again, because of the card we mentioned before, there might be, Wingblade Disciple is a card we've enjoyed. The Uthros Psionicist, which are neither of those words are real. That, and maybe this, maybe there is some kind of and with Warp, I think there might be some kind of an archetype that is maybe potentially revealing itself here. I don't think that the Titan is a good enough payoff for an archetype like that, but if it's essentially free, if the text is mostly free, then I think that this is a reasonable card. Will it be mostly free? I don't know, and it depends, I think, in large part on the amount of 1-mana cantrips in your environment. So you're adding honor to your cube, then this seems like a card that you might also want to consider. But yeah, I don't want to make it seem like I'm coming in hot on this. I generally don't like this style of card, but this is a little bit different than the ones we've seen in the past.
Wait,
Yeah,
okay,
I
so
actually completely agree with you, Daneelius.
Yeah,
It's like a D
okay.
plus. Like I don't actually think this is an A plus. Just to be clear,
This is why I have 12 hours of editing for every Peasant review that we do.
It's a cool
Teld
card.
has
It's a
to-
cool card.
Yeah, it's fine. Titan, I don't like the
I
use
just
of
go find
Titan
like
on a-
10 stray dogs, and I'm just like talking to Tim about keeping them.
Yeah, hey Lois, I just bought 30 puppies or whatever. Okay, moving on from that. Mechan Navigator. Teld, is this another U edition? Actually, Daneelius.
This is
this
not
is
me.
me.
No, this is not me.
Okay.
This is
Oh,
Mechan
our
Navigator.
looter.
One in a blue for a robot pilot. It's a 2/1 uncommon. Whenever this creature becomes tapped, draw a card, then discard a card. So the clearest comparison is Volatile Wanderglyph, the red creature from LCI, I want to say, that was a 2/2, and when it became tapped, you got to rummage, and this gets to loot when it becomes tapped. However, if you compare this to Shoreline Looter, obviously it doesn't look nearly as strong. So why is it on the list? It's on the list because of its type line. It says artifact creature, and that is a huge
Robot pilot.
and all four words matter. No, just the artifact creature part matters a lot. As I've said many times over the last few set reviews, blue's artifacts stink. Now we are getting one awesome blue artifact in this set that's going to help out a little bit, but just for this being an artifact means that I am at least a little bit interested, but I'm not going to argue for it over Shoreline Looter. It's similar to Wanderglyph, but it has one toughness, which I hate. So if you're needing to boost the artifact count, I like this more than most of the other 2-mana artifacts that blue has access to, but I still don't think it's amazing.
Yeah, I'm really not interested in a 2-mana 2/1 that dies to loot. That's not really it, dog.
Yeah, I've got nothing to say on the card, but obviously the when this creature becomes tap text is because you're supposed to station with it, and then it triggers when you station.
Or crew, or saddle, or there's a number of ways to tap your creatures outside of combat.
Or well, yeah, you like the botanist. Like there's ways to get your creatures tapped, but the reason this is templated the way it is because the retail limited format, you're going to be stationing with it, and you'll see that text on a lot of cards in the set. At least 4 or 5 cards have when this becomes tap triggers to give you value for tapping your creatures down and dying when your opponent attacks you back. So, by the way,
at the moment we kind of have two. We kind of have two of the 2-mana discard cards. We have Canyon Crab and Shoreline Looter, and this is substantially worse than either.
Easily
cards.
worse unless
Agreed.
you're actively pushing artifact. Which, by the way, spacecraft aside here. I mentioned this in the mainline cube, Daneelius, but I'm thinking of spacecraft as if you ever want to get your spacecraft online, you have to put the card sleep in your opponent's hand, and they get to cast it for free. That's what it feels like to. Well, you have to be opening yourself up to 10 points of damage at some point just to get your.
But then they can't crew their station, so
Ah, yeah, you're right. You're right. You mentioned not busted artifact, but really good artifact. I assume it's It might be busted. I assume it's this one. Go ahead and talk us through
this is my favorite card of the set by a huge amount. So this is Cryogen Relic, 1 in a blue for an artifact, the first playable blue artifact in years. When this artifact enters or leaves the battlefield, draw a card. And 1 in a blue, sacrifice this artifact, put a stun counter on up to 1 target tapped creature. So the 1 in a blue, when this artifact enters or leaves, draw a card, is Ichor Wellspring, I believe. And so
better. I mean, it's not when it goes to the graveyard.
Right. Sorry. Yes. Absolutely. Definitely.
We can pick it up with Core Skyfisher.
Well, yeah. We're going to get to all the synergies in a second, but the fact that this can sacrifice itself is a huge upside. Now, really quickly on that line. Yes, it can. It has to target a tapped creature, so you can't stun an untapped creature. That would make this card insane. But it's up to 1 target tapped creature, so you can sacrifice this proactively, even if you don't have a target for it. So some of the things that one of the cards that actually came to mind for this card for me was Deduce, and Deduce for us has become kind of the best in class draw 2 for blue, which it's 1 in a blue for an instant, draw a card, make a clue. You can kind of think of this as 1 in a blue, draw a card, make a clue. It's pretty similar in its effect, but the clue has upside because it can stun potentially. The fact that you can pick this up with your Skyfishers is obviously huge. You can put this in your blue-red deck with Gleaming Geardrake, and when you sacrifice this, the Geardrake gets a bit bigger. And on top of all that, sometimes you will just get to stun their attacking creature, and then this becomes way better than any other version of this effect that we've seen. So I think this card is really strong. I'm loath to give it higher than just a C because I assume there are blue decks that won't play this. There are blue decks that don't get excited about Deduce in my environment either, but I think it's a really strong C in the sense that if I'm synergizing with artifacts especially, I'm slamming this, but even just in a control deck in decks that care about drawing multiple cards a turn, I think this card's going to be really strong.
Yeah, I like this alongside Deduce because one of the reasons that one of the things I like about Deduce is for cards like Mischievous Mystic and Emrakul's Messenger, they can draw on 2 separate turns, or they can kind of trigger, they can basically give you multiple triggers, or Deduce can trigger on your opponent's turn, that sort of thing. Man, this card's great though. Like, so you were talking about Gleaming Gear Drake, there's like Sokinzen Smelter, and, Builder's Talent with it. You can pick it back up out of the graveyard, draw more cards, like, the just leaving the battlefield effect instead of having to manually sack it or even die just opens up so many lines with this card. I think this is a C. I've got this rated as a C at the moment. Maybe I'd go as high as C+, but for me, I'm probably going to draft this if it's like a B+.
And as a target for your animating effects, this card is fantastic because like you already got the card out of it, and when they deal, like you put Zoetic Glyph on this, and you're going to draw 2 cards when they deal with this effect. Like there's a lot of synergizing potential with this card.
Yeah, it also doesn't tap, so you could actually like sack it in response when they target your animated dude, so that you get a little more value on the back end.
Yeah, well, it leaves the battlefield seems absurd to me on this instead of when it goes to the graveyard. Not that it changes too much, but like being able to pick it up and draw a card is insane. If you blink it, you draw 2 cards. Like, there's not a lot of things that blink an artifact, but the cards that do, like, that seems pretty nuts to me. Like, when it leaves that, I mean, just to be clear, Ichor Wellspring is a rock solid card in cubes that support what that card is doing, and giving it extra modality in 2 ways seems really strong. Like, Black got that one, like, Mephitic draft, I think, from Mephitic draft from LCI. That was an Ichor Wellspring with downside.
Yeah, the best thing about this is it's an Ichor Wellspring that also doesn't demand anything out of you. You get the Ichor Wellspring effect with upside, but also if you don't care about a Ichor Wellspring and you want a 4-mana draw 2 or a Deduce in your deck, you get that. It just does
that also gains some life potentially. And one other quick note is that in the like kind of Dirtle Skyfishery type decks that maybe aren't running Skyfisher specifically, but are running more like Essence Reliquary, for instance, I generally don't like playing the objects that just draw cards, because you're kind of getting card advantage anyways from just playing your Skyfishers or your Essence Reliquaries. I need like board impact, but this is giving you two card draws for 2 mana. That's a whole different thing. Like Essence Reliquarying this back to your hand every turn seems like a much more reasonable option than some of the other objects that are just card advantage.
Fletcher is never going to lose a game again. he's never going to lose a game. I mean, that I don't want to even diminish how important that stun counter is. It's like, it's not just like, oh, it's upside, LOL, ha ha ha. It's like, you're not getting attacked for a turn after drawing your cards. That's exactly what you want to do when you're drawing extra cards, is like not be under pressure.
Imagine this is in play and they have 2 mana up. Are you attacking with your 4/4?
Yeah, like, you might not even attack. Is the funny,
you
like
give
if
them
there's
value.
That's sweet. I mentioned this in the mainline cube, but blue card draw is on a tear this year between, I mean, even at lower rarities, there's some higher rarity stuff like the Star Charts card in this set, but Stock Up, Cryogen Relic. I mean, we don't play it in our cube, but Combat Tutorial ended up being an absolute banger in Final Fantasy Limited, which is the divination with a +1/+1 counter. Like it feels like whoever is in charge of like the blue council or whatever at Wizards of the Coast is like, okay, blue card draw needs to get better, and they're doing it. And not like blue card draw was even that miserable before or anything, but this is just an excellent card. Just an excellent card.
Yeah, so all the blue card draws getting super pushed. Every format turns into soup pile, and 1-drops are terrible.
Yeah, format Magic's thriving. Magic's thriving. Save it for another podcast. Speaking of which, Teld, go ahead and take this card and then explain to me why it's not just Core Skyfisher, because
I can't do that.
That's this has a lot of text that's hiding the fact that this card is just Core Skyfisher.
Yeah, so next up is Desculpting Blast. It's 1 and a blue for an instant. Return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. If it was attacking, create a 1/1 colorless drone artifact creature token with flying, and this token can block only creatures with flying. And yeah, so the idea on the surface is that you're going to bounce your opponent's attacking creature and you get a little bit of upside so you can start attacking them when you tempo them. But the actual way that this card is going to end up getting played is bouncing our own attacking creatures so that we go up a 1/1. And we just now have Core Skyfisher instant so that we can synergize with Kishla Trawler and Slick Shot Show Off, or Slick Shot Lockpicker.
You do not have to target an attacking creature either. You could just pick up your Cryogen Relic and replay it. Like, you give up the 1/1 flyer, but you can just pick up whatever you want.
Yeah, this card's awesome.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the comp that was written here is Callous Dismissal, and I moved off Callous Dismissal a while back because our feeling was kind of the small mana ward just wasn't impactful enough, and you're often bouncing, a creature back to their hand that's going to get value when they replay it, and all that's still true for this, but the fact that this has just so much modality, like the modality on this is kind of insane. This is one of those kind of cards where it's like, okay, you're getting modality, but is the best mode any good? And it's like, yes, the best mode here is definitely good, and then there's also 7 different modes you have. So, I don't think it's like a first pickable blue card, but I imagine I'll be playing it quite often.
Yeah, the art is also like Thanos punching octopus tentacles, and there's like this little portal monster over on the side. Like, I don't know what's happening there. But
isn't it a guy disintegrating the guy in a spacesuit? Isn't it a jellyfish turning him into atoms? Like, it's de-sculpting him?
I think he's de-sculpting him, yeah.
That makes more sense, but I'm going to go with Thanos punching octopus tentacles, if I may have that one. Okay, Mental Modulation. What is it? 1 in a blue for a common instant. This spell costs 1 less to cast during your turn. Tap target artifact or creature, draw a card. Okay, so this is not a card that I have thought about very much at all, so I will throw this one over to Daneelius.
Okay, yeah, so I think this is an example of where card templating can have like a really big impact on how you think about a card, how you evaluate it, because I think if this instead had just been blue for a sorcery that said tap target artifact or creature, draw a card, and then it had a kicker of 1 to cast it at instant speed, you'd think about it a lot differently. But the fact that it starts at 2 and you're like, okay, I guess I gotta work, I gotta do something extra to make it cost 1. That's actually the opposite. It's like the thing costs 1, and then if you want to, you can up the value to 2 to do something on your opponent's turn. I liken this to the cards like Hithlane Knots and Ice from Fire and Ice, but also to Opt, in the sense that I think a large percentage of the time, this is just going to be a 1-mana cantrip for you that in your blue tempo decks, especially blue-green, this is going to do a lot of work. And the reason why I added this to the sheet specifically is blue-green. We've been talking a lot about how to make blue-green work in Peasant over the last couple of podcasts, and I think that this is the exact kind of card that I want in a blue-green deck, where I have my green 3/3, 4/3, whatever, my slightly larger green creatures on the ground, and I'm trying to leverage my blue spells to help those green creatures get through quickly. And this is the exact kind of card that I imagine wanting to run there. It also obviously works well with Mischievous Mystic and any kind of double spelling synergies you have. So I think, again, maybe not quite best in class, but like 1 mana, draw a card, and give you some tempo is something I'm definitely interested in.
Yeah, I kind of sign on to what you're saying there. I don't necessarily think it's good enough to get a cube slot, for the same reasons when we talked about Honor, that I think all the things you said are absolutely true. And I think this is a little more generically you just put in your deck, because I think the blue deck, like, you can't whiff on this, right? I mean, I guess there are ways to whiff, but you're unlikely to whiff on this. And, the blue, like, tempo-y sort of thing is probably more generically applicable than some of the synergies on Honor. But I think the question ends up being a question of cube equity, of just like, do you want to burn a cube slot for this? And that's going to kind of depend on your environment. But I think this is playable. And I think you're right that, like, you read this as a 2-mana card, it comes off like, oh, that's not very good. And then when you process that this is actually a 1-mana card that you can cast for 2 mana, it does read a lot better. And I kind of had the same sort of thought process when I read it. It's like, 2 mana, don't really care. And then you read it and you're like, wait, no, this is a 1-mana spell.
Interesting. Yeah, these jellyfish cards all look like the same card to me, so I don't know if I missed this one or what, but seems fine. I mean, I read this as Rashadan Port, right? We're going to upkeep, tap their artifact land. They're just going to skip their turn.
Oh my gosh.
You monster.
maybe a slight exaggeration. I have a hard time buying into, like, this is just a 1-mana spell, but I guess if there's literally any creatures on board, that is true. So, or if there are, or whatever. Because Dominaria United had a card.
Timely Interference.
Timely Interference that was like -1/-0, a creature cantrip for blue mana. It had like a red kicker cost, and like I remember bringing that up back in the day, 2018 or whatever. Dominaria United was later. Whenever that set came out, I was like, is this card good enough as just like a cantrip? Like, there's almost always creatures in play, and like I got kind of talked off that ledge and think I agree. Like, if there's creatures in play and they must be in play for me to cantrip, like I kind of come off of them a little bit, and I'm feeling that a little bit here too. So I'll have to kind of reevaluate this one, but I do like playing with cards like this, especially when it's just like, let me churn some wheels and keep an attacker off my back for a second. Also, kind of a combo with Cryogen Relic to get a creature tapped down or whatever. But yeah, I don't quite see it here the same way you're describing it, but I have to admit, I haven't really, I kind of like glossed over this card. All the jellyfish cards, I kind of like read them once and then moved on with my life. So
I think you both are totally right. I think the cube equity question is definitely important here. The thing that I'm more interested in this versus like timely interference is that I see this as dealing damage, and that's the thing that if I can get blue to be a little bit better at dealing damage, that's something I'm interested in. So whereas timely interference is more of a reactive card, it's like, okay, maybe I can win a combat with it, or like save my creature in combat, or take a little less damage for my opponent. This one's actually like, okay, no, I played, I went 2-drop into 3-drop green creature into turn 4, 2-drop or 3-drop plus this, deal a bunch of damage, and I'm still going, or I made a token off of Mischievous Mystic or anything like that.
Sure.
That's where I'm interested in this card, is it's helping blue in a way that it's bad currently.
Yeah, I mean, if this costs just blue, I'd be like, yeah, this card's fantastic. So if it actually is that a decent percentage of the time, then you're probably right. So I just remembered, we got a great comment on the last Peasant Review episode that we did, or maybe it was the kind of like archetypes episode that we did as a mainline episode with Daneelius here, but somebody commented and asked if we could start putting the show notes somewhere where people could find them so that they could follow along, because I don't have the time to put the actual card images in the editing that I do. It's just way too time consuming. And the reason I mention that is because I'm going to try to remember to do that with this episode. And you will notice, if you're scrolling and following along, which cards Teld added to the document, because they are gigantic and left aligned when I painstakingly like organize these documents like to a T. No, it's there. There's no fixing it. So I know for a fact that Teld probably added these last 2 blue cards.
I did this literally before every time we record. I take another look through the spoiler
every time. Chris is bad for this too, where it's like just all over the place. It's like, okay, well,
it's just like, did I miss anything? And they're like, oh yeah, I wanted to talk about this card.
Wrong card name on the wrong thing. Like, it's like, okay, well, as long as we see the card image, that's what matters.
So these the last 2 are 2 pieces of equipment. One I actually think is pretty interesting, and the other one I think is just neat. The first one is Ilvoy Lightjammer. It's 1 and a blue for an artifact equipment with flash. When it enters, you attach it to a target creature you control, and it gains hexproof till end of turn. Equipped creature gets +1/+2 and has an equip cost of 3. So this is kind of an equipment artifact version of, is it Cyber Cryptomancer? I believe is the name of the card. Yeah. Except, like, if your creature dies, you get to keep around the stats. You get all the things you want to do with an artifact. You can go fetch it up with your Delivery Moogle or your Guidelight Pathmaker if you want. You can, like, pick it up and replay it, obviously, but you can sack it to a Sokinzen Smelter. It's just got a little more play to it because it's an artifact, and there's more and more cards in Magic that care about that. I don't necessarily think that it's great, but I think this effect is decent. And I think this is, I think we talk a lot about artifacts being good. I think this is just an interesting card.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have seen, I don't know if we've seen this as an equipment before, but we have seen this as an aura before, like Starlit Mantle and Cradle of Safety come to mind. And also the black version, like what was that black fan from Mom that was like a
Bladed Battle Fan, yeah.
Yeah, that's the one. Give Indestructible and stuff like that. The difference between this and the auras is that it leaves something behind that you can then throw on other creatures. So it's probably, in fact, it's strictly better than Starlit Mantle or Cradle of Safety. Like those
outside of artifact or outside of enchantment synergies,
yeah.
So the last card's Atomic Microsizer. It's a single blue for a artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+0. Whenever equipped creature attacks, choose up to 1 target creature. That creature can't be blocked this turn and has base power and toughness 1/1 until end of turn with an equip cost of 2. And the art depicts Ant-Man getting ready to be thrown at Thanos.
Another Thanos art, yeah. Yeah, what do you like about this card? I mean, it is neat. I will give you that. It is neat.
Yeah, I just like that it has a lot of different things going on for it. So, I mean, 1 mana means that you can, like, with a 2 equip means that you can cope yourself into thinking that you can actually, equip this and do something with it. And then I like that if you're trying to slip a dude through, you can equip it to a creature and you can either ship with that creature and make it the 1/1. That way it can slip through. It'll attack for 2, right? Because it's still getting +1 because it's base power. Or you can attack with like a bigger creature that's equipped and slip a different creature through. Or the other hidden mode, you can target your opponent's creature so that it becomes a 1/1. And so it just has a bunch of different modalities to it that I don't think any of them are actually good or worth putting this card in your deck or cube. But they're all really cool, and I don't remember seeing this particular... Like, we see these sort of blue shrink effects before, and we've seen them on a creature before, but I don't think we've seen them with this much flexibility and ability to, like, move it around.
No, the closest thing I can think of is Azure Beastbinder, and I think that turns something into a 2/2.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, which was a rare as well, so you just never see it at Peasant. Yeah, this is I think a one-of-a-kind style effect that, again, like that 2/4 with the mana reduction, I'm like, okay, well, what are you doing with this then? Like, what are you supposed to do with the card? And I don't have a direct answer for that, so that leads me to believe that, like, people wouldn't take it or it's not worth the cube slot. But, like, yeah, there's a lot of knobs. There's a lot of interesting things you can... Yeah, I mean, you can go get a delivery Moogle, or this can be got with delivery Moogle, so I guess there's something. The equip cost isn't exorbitant. It's only blue to get in play. So there's probably something going on here. Worth the cube slot? Are we actually going to play this? I highly doubt it.
Oh, actually, I know what you're doing with this. You're making your 8/8 Heartfire hero able to be unblockable.
Turn it into... Oh, I guess it would retain its power. It would retain its power.
We found it.
Sure. Saboteur abilities, I guess, is the joke. Like,
well, the thing is, if this ends up being good, it's another in a long line of 1 mana equipment that costs 2 to equip that have been busted in Peasants. So I assume this is going to be great because we have so many recent examples of this effect being very good.
I see what you're doing there, and I reject the premise. And yeah, so some cool blue equipment to close things out.
Yeah. And
okay.
I want to real quick. I want to go back and say,
yes.
After thinking about it more, I think that 3 mana to warp your Codecracker Hound isn't sleight of hand. It's more like divination. Still really slow, but still solid.
Apology accepted.
Okay.
All right, folks. So just letting you know, there's been a bit of a time lapse between us getting to blue and black. The set has released, so we actually have a little bit more information. And I also have to let you know, Tim came down with an illness, and he is not going to be able to make it. So it's just going to be me and Daneelius for the rest of this review. So I'm sorry if you have come to appreciate Tim's dad jokes and soothing voice. You'll have to deal with this instead.
Yeah, and we wish Tim a speedy recovery.
Absolutely. All right, so moving into black, we're going to start with Multicolor Zealot. And Daneelius, I've already talked about this card in the mainline review, which is basically that I think it's a perfect design and it's exactly what I want. So I'm going to let you take the lead on this one because I've already said my piece on this one.
Yeah, I think that I keep coming up and up on this. So this is, for those who don't know, Multicolor Zealot, 1 and a black for a 3/2. Sacrifice another creature or artifact to surveil 1. That is an ungated ability, which is not something I thought we would be getting, honestly, in modern Limited. But they seem to not be very concerned, so that's better for us. I think this card is incredibly generous.
Second time they released this effect and immediately made an infinite combo.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
in the retail set.
This card is so generous in just every possible way. The fact that it's a 3/2 for 2, and side note, just another example. There's multiple in this set of 2/3 or 3/2, or just 5 stats worth of power and toughness on 2 drops now being kind of the norm. And I'm really... Oh, and the fact that it surveils and not scries is really relevant for a specific combo piece that we'll bring up in a second. So 3 types of cards that I'm interested in with this effect. One is the Caesarian Voidborn from this set effect, or there's a few copies, Albed Scavengers now, that does this, where when an artifact or creature leaves the battlefield for your side, you drain 1. I'm going to be playing, I think, 3 coming up in the coming season just to kind of test the limits of what this can do. The second kind of effect that you got to be interested in with this is, skeletons or creatures in general that return from the graveyard. We have 1 coming up in a second. And then the last one that I'm very intrigued by, specifically because of the Surveil line here, is cards like the Final Days or Revenge of the Rats. The fact that you can kind of sack your whole board, mill, a huge portion of your deck, and then cast back a Final Days and then sack that whole board again if you have, again, kind of one of these combo pieces in play. I think that there's serious combo potential here. I've come up and up and up on this since I saw it originally spoiled. So I got it as like a B- right now, in the sense that I foresee taking this very early in packs and being pretty happy to have this as my first black card. We'll see if that comes true.
Yeah, so I had initially put this at like a C plus, like the top end of a card that I think would be just a fine piece of my deck. And I think I might just join you there at like, this is probably a pull. You have a card, or Tim had a card on here, Toxic Abomination as a comp. And if you don't remember that card, I believe it's for Exit All Be One. And it's a 3/2 for 2 that costs you life. And this is just a 3/2 for 2 that has like incredible
Massive
upside. Yeah, and like I said, this card immediately created a infinite combo in the retail set with nothing but commons and uncommons. And while we're probably not going to be doing that in Cube quite as often, because we're kind of cognizant of those things and we'll remove them, the fact that you can do those sort of soft combos, like you said, with the Revenge of the Rats, with the Final Days, and on top of just like the reassembling skeleton and all the other things you can do, this card is really sweet. And Surveil is so good because like there's so many cards now that care about the graveyard in Cube, especially in Peasant.
Well, first of all, you shouldn't tease anymore. You should say what the combo is.
I didn't want to. I was teasing it because I don't remember the names of the cards, but essentially, if you have, it's one of the combo pieces are this card, Multicolor Zealot. There are both a Blood Artist or like a Albed Scavenger type effect, as well as as well as the Molten Gatekeeper effect. That's like a deal 1 when a creature enters play.
Yeah.
And so you combine one of those two pieces with this, and then you need 2 copies of, I believe it's a common 4/5 for 5 with Warp 2. And when it enters, it does the supernatural stamina effect of +2, +0. Right. And when this creature dies, you return it into play tapped. And so with 2 of them, even if you warp them, you give the first one the trigger, right? And then you sack the one that has the trigger on it. It comes back into play and gives the other one the trigger. And then you sack that one and you repeat the loop until your opponent dies.
Well, so we're sticking here for a bit because I do think this is like one of the headliners of the set. But like, that might be a little bit Magic Christmas Land. But I think part of the thing to just keep in mind with this card is you will stumble into infinites with a card like this, or near infinites, or just this is a combo card on a 2-mana 3/2 body. It's waiting to be broken for sure.
Yeah, it's a combo card that also just works in like your black based mid range deck.
Every deck. Yeah, every deck.
Yeah, and the combo, I'm bringing it up because, again, it's made entirely of commons and uncommons, but some other things that really give this combo a little more resiliency is there's cards like Fellgrave Ship in the format that are like the Gravedigger effect, but they also mill you. And so it helps you dig for the combo pieces while also giving you some resilience. And from what I understand from a lot of early talk about the format is that removal is slightly deprioritized in this set, and I don't know how true that is. I'm 2 drafts in. I haven't really drafted this set very much. It doesn't pique my interest. But from what I understand, removal is slightly depreciated as well. And so if that's the case, like just being able to be a little more resilient with these Gravedigger effects and having a little bit less interruption, if your opponent ever taps out, you can win the game on the spot from like 5 mana. It's kind of crazy.
Yep, and I think it's going to play really well with this next card. Well, if you think that this next card is worth running. But if we moving on for Timeline Color, this is black for a 2/2 Drix. Warlock, uncommon with haste. You may cast this card from your graveyard using its warp ability, and it has warp for black and pay 2 life. I think that black on this is wildly punishing, and it's really important that we underline how punishing that is. I don't see this as a 2-drop in your deck unless you're running north of 12 black sources, I would say. But it's a combo card, and if you're really excited about the combo potential of Umbral Collar Zealot, then Timeline Color could be just right for you. And I'm just imagining scenarios. Imagine you ever make it to the late game with a deck that is heavy black with color and zealot. I mean, you have one of those salvagers effects in play, and as long as you have 1 more life than your opponent, you're kind of just fireballing. It's not exactly fireball, obviously, but like I think that the potential here specifically with zealot is really high. If you don't want to run zealot, or if you think that that's too powerful for you, or if you don't like the combo potential that represents, then I'm really not interested in color at all. But I think if that's something that you want to explore, then the color zealot combination could be reasonable. I have color is like a C- in the sense that I really only see it in a real kind of aristocrat style deck. I don't care about this at all as like an aggro piece, but in a combo deck, I think it's interesting.
Yeah, I actually have it as a C underscore, but that's because of my inability to apparently type a minus. So yeah, I'm not huge on this, but I agree with you. I kind of see it as a combo card. Like if I'm looking to do something a little more fair, I think the Transmogrant from MH3 and Reassembling Skeleton are both better fair space cards for these sort of effects. But this one does notably have such a cheap entry cost in terms of mana that you can do some very powerful things with it as long as you're enabling it with a sack outlet like Phantom Train or the Umbracar Zealot.
And one quick thing to note, in addition to something like Caesarean Voidborn, which we're going to get to later, or Albed Scavengers, or Marionette Apprentice. I guess really that Apprentice doesn't really work because it doesn't give you life as you're kind of going through these steps. But if you're trying to do the whole sacrifice combo thing, something like a Lunarch Veteran or other Soul Sisters also could help break parity while you're trying to go through this loop. But every non-black card you add to your deck makes it, harder and harder to actually make this happen. You want a lot of black sources, I think, in your deck if you're doing any side of time and color, honestly. And given that, I think it's honestly not that of an interesting card for Cube. But the fact that we haven't really seen something this potent before to pair with something like free sack outlet like Zealot, if you're willing to run many black sources, makes it kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think the comparison for me for this is the Forsaken Miner out of OTJ, because it has a similar combo potential, but it specifically requires something like Blood Artist that targets, which not all of the various versions of these cards do.
Yep.
Agreed. All right, so moving on, this takes us to Faller's Faithful. This is 2 and a black for a 3/1 human wizard, and when it enters, destroy up to one other target creature. If it wasn't dealt damage this turn, its controller draws 2 cards. So the pull of this card is that it has a lot of flexibility. You can kill your opponent's creatures, you can play it post-combat or after a pinger effect to clean up a creature, you can blow up your own creatures and kind of use it like a Fell Stinger. There are things you can do with this card. That being said, personal opinion, the what you give up over Fell Stinger, the Death Touch, the second point of toughness, the inability to interact with what is it called, Exploit. Because once Exploit has activated, like the trigger, you could respond before they play the trigger, but once you actually resolve the trigger or put the trigger, to go through it, your opponent can't interact with it and make you not sack a thing, right, and get your charge. But if you target something, your opponent can do that, right? They can break up this effect with like a bounce spell or something.
Yeah, they could interact with Fellstinger too, because if they kill Fellstinger with the exploit trigger on the stack, then the exploit benefit goes away, and so
does it? Okay,
it does. Yeah, so it's like there is a window there, and I think one of the interesting things about this card is the fact that you get the effect regardless of whether or not the creature dies that it targets. So I don't think what you can do. I don't think you can go Feller's Faithful, target your own thing, then sacrifice that thing. And my ignorance is coming up here. I'm similarly inexperienced with the set as you are. I haven't played in retail much, so I'm not sure exactly how that works. But I know that one thing you could do is play this, target your indestructible creature if you happen to have one, and then you would still get to draw the 2 cards. So there's some interesting play with this effect, but I do want to read something that Tim wrote. Since he's not here, it'll be his avatar. It says, "Bad modality isn't modality." And I think that's definitely true. When the effects that you're getting are worse, when the output that you're getting on your modes are clearly worse than other smaller cards, it makes me less excited about the modality. But there is something here. The fact that, I'm currently not playing any of these kind of finisher creatures where it comes in and it kills something off that has taken some damage. But those, can be reasonable. I would much rather those effects have flash because, this makes this an aggro-only ability.
Yeah, comparing this to Downwind Ambusher as a finisher effect or Fellstinger as a card draw effect, it doesn't have me excited about either piece because both of those other cards are just way better. And so the argument would be here is like, did the compression of those 2 cards, did we get enough value of each piece of it for it to be worth it? And my opinion is no. I think this card seems really bad. But we'll have to see, I guess.
I think the key thing for me is if it was a 3/2, I would be all over it. But I think as we've talked many times before, 1 toughness creatures, especially at higher mana values, you need a lot, and I think this probably misses in the end. But I do plan on testing it just to see if the fact that it's a little different than Fellstinger can excite my drafters. But I doubt it sticks around for very long.
All right, let us know how that plays out because we passed on this one. I just don't see it getting there. So that takes us to the obligatory Zulaport Cutthroat of the set, which is Susurian Voidborn. I think you've mentioned this card a couple of times. It's 2 and a black for a 2/2, and it has Warp for a single black. And whenever this creature or another creature or artifact you control dies, target opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. I think we were discussing whether the 3rd point of toughness is better or worse than getting access to the warp ability. We settled on trying it out to just see how it's going to play. I'm a little skeptical, but Tim did sell me on the idea that Warp 1 is low enough that we can set up some cool plays with this card. I will say from a design perspective, I know it would have been a substantially more powerful card, but would this card have been too good if it said whenever this creature or another creature or artifact you control leaves the battlefield? That way you could get a drain when you warp it?
Well, you do get the 1 drain. Oh, I see what you're saying. You don't. Yeah. I don't know. I think that there's a lot of combo potential with this card. The fact that you can just put it in for 1 black on the turn that you're going to go, like, you don't need to expose this to removal and then like set up your turn, the following turn. Like if you have a little mini, sacrifice engine going with Zealot, and even if it's just with like a bunch of food or whatever it is, you can just put this in for 1 mana, leave all your other mana up and kind of go off. So, I mean, I don't know. This is a worse fair card than Albid Salvagers, definitely, and it's a better combo card. And so, again, I think you have to make a little bit of a decision for your own environment about like what sorts of play patterns are you looking to push. But one thing I'll note about it is that you can just play both, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It depends a lot on the size of your environment. Obviously, I've got a 540 cube, and so I'm gonna try to play both and see if it breaks things. But I don't mind necessarily pushing black towards a little bit more of a synergistic space. In my cube, black has long been kind of the color of mid range, where you just get a lot of interaction, just tons of interaction in 2-for-1s, and so black is just a really solid mid range and control color, and kind of pushing it in this direction of more of an assertive combo style color is interesting to me. So yeah, in the end, I don't know. I don't know if it's better than Albid Salvagers or not. It seems like a better combo card. That's worth noting.
Yeah, I think, definitely a better combo card. It can do some very, very explosive things. So that takes us to the next black card, which is Monoist Circuit Feeder. So it's 4 black for a 4/4 flying artifact creature. And whenever this creature enters until end of turn, target creature you control gets +X/+O, and target creature an opponent controls gets -0/-X, where X is the number of artifacts you control. Now, this card is one of those cards that is going to vary based on your environment quite a bit. If you have access to a lot of artifacts, if you're supporting green-black food, if you're supporting artifacts across all colors and you're really trying to seed those into your cube, I think this card's pretty crazy. If it gives like +3/+O, -0/-3, and is also a 4/4 flyer, that's kind of an insane rate to me. And it goes better than that. That's not an unreasonable. If you're supporting it, that's not unreasonable, and it could get much bigger than that. And I have to do this at least once per episode, or as often as I can. This card goes absolutely crazy with Heartfire Hero if you're able to set it up.
I did.
But yeah, I think this card's really, really powerful. But I do have questions as to how many environments it will go into if you aren't trying to support those things.
I love that you see a 6-mana card that wants artifacts in play, and you're like, hey, it's good with Heartfire Hero. That's good. I'll be honest, I'm not super high on this card, and that's coming from somebody who has a pretty clear artifact theme throughout my cube. The reason for that is I think that you really need to be pretty dedicated to artifacts to want this card. There's a couple reasons for that. One is it's a 6-drop, and so for my 6-drops that don't have buyouts, I need them to be always doing the thing and doing it really well. And so I imagine, all right, what about the scenario where I have like 1 artifact in play? And I play this, and I have 2 total, and it's a 6-mana 4/4 flyer that kills a small thing and gives my thing a slight buff, and it's like, okay, that's good. I mean, it's not awful, but it's 6 mana. Where this starts to really pop off is where you have 2, 3, 4 artifacts already in play, and as we talked about on the kind of unique themes or unique archetypes episode that we did a few weeks back, I kind of try to design I include artifact payoffs so that you don't specifically need to have a board full of them, because it's not actually that easy to make that happen, especially in Cube where time is compressed, where a lot of removal and objects are trading off all the time. So I see this being a card that very often is giving just +2, +0 to your creature and killing a small thing on the opponent's side. And I just don't think that's a very compelling payoff. So where I would be interested in this card is if your cube has a specific artifact theme in black, where it's like black is about artifacts, or your black-blue or black-red section is intentionally about artifacts, and there's a ton of artifacts, and you're planning on having many artifacts in play all the time. I think this would be excellent in an affinity-style cube.
Hear me out. Okay, turn 1, you play Heartfire Hero. Turn 2, you play Barb Batterfist. Turn 3, Molten Gatekeeper. Sure, that actually doesn't contribute to this at all. But any 3-mana artifact, we've already got 3 artifacts in play for our circuit feeder to pump up our Heartfire Hero. So I agree with you. Living Weapon is a great way to support this and bridge the gap between this and your Heartfire Hero decks.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, in the end, I think it's a fine card. If you have a light artifact theme, I don't love it. If you have a strong artifact theme, it gets great. But the key thing for me here is it's a 6-mana card. I need a lot for my 6-mana cards, and being like a solid kind of niche payoff to me is like not really what I'd be looking for. So fine card, but I think I'd rather play one of the more generically good Wicked Patrol or Wix Patrol versions of this effect.
Yeah, and for our sake in our cube, we are sticking to Wix Patrol because we don't really support artifacts quite that densely. I feel like this is the kind of card that as you approach like Affinity Cube territory, where you're really trying to make sure that artifacts are a core part of everything, it probably gets up into like the B+ range, because if you're giving like -5 and +5 and putting a 4/4 flyer into play, that's pretty insane. But you really need to be dedicated to artifacts. I think in most cube environments, this is going to be somewhere in the realm of like a D+ to like a C level card.
Yep, agreed.
All right, and that takes us on to Tragic Trajectory. This is a card that we are skipping in in our Peasant Cube. I assume you're going to be playing this one. It's a single black mana for a sorcery with target creature gets -2/-2 until end of turn, and if you void, that is a creature exiled. A non-land permanent left the battlefield, or a spell was placed into warp. A spell was warped. I'm terrible at reading, sorry. The creature gets -10 instead. So kind of a sorcery speed disfigure Tragic Slip style card that if you're able to get the void, it will go ahead and turn into Sword to Plowshares, essentially. We figured that this card is probably just in Peasant at -10 if you want it to be basically all the time, which is maybe like a little generous, but I figure it's -10 often enough that we didn't feel comfortable including it, because we do try to stay away from some of the hyper efficient black removal like that. Like we get to this level of efficiency just because of what it's done to our cube in the past.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I definitely have seen others not adding it because they felt like it was too weak. And for me, the way I see it is, it seems very strong to me, but it's a sorcery. I actually was comparing it in the show notes here to Grim Bauble, in the sense that those are both kind of sorcery speed -2/-2 effects that have some other bonus. And the bonus this has is that it will often just kill the creature it targets. And the bonus that Bauble has is it's an artifact in play and synergizes with all your artifact things. So, I think if spells is a bigger part of your black section, this gets more exciting, especially if you're playing plenty of fetch lands. I think this is plenty exciting. I don't necessarily
it doesn't work with fetches.
Oh, non-land permanent. Thank you. Okay, that's good to know. Well, that makes it worse, certainly. I don't know. Yeah, I guess what I'd say is I'm surprised that you guys aren't adding it because you think it's too strong, but I understand the argument. I think that it will often just be a -2/-2, but the fact that you can try to set up a -10 makes it at least worth thinking about, especially if you're just trying to get more and more 1-mana removal in your cube. Kind of if you're thinking the opposite of you guys. And a few of the cube curators I was talking to in Discord over the last couple weeks, they mentioned that they're basically trying to get as many 1-mana removal spells as they can that are worth playing into their environments as kind of mana values get compressed. And so for them, this is like a clear add. So I don't know. I'm not sure if I'll add this yet. I think Grim Bauble is more fun to play around with. It synergizes more easily with the rest of my environment. So we'll see.
I think one interesting thing about this card, if we were going to try it, that I do think is compelling, is that this is the kind of card that for like a Rakdos or a black-white deck is probably able to trigger this fairly easily. Yeah. Whereas I think green-black and blue-black are going to struggle a little more to want to put this in their deck and be able to activate it, be able to get it going. So there is that I do think is something to mention.
Agreed. It's a Mardu removal spell. Yeah.
See, I do think it's interesting how cube design you've kind of got different strains of thought going on there. Where like you said, some of your cube design guys are trying to fit as many 1-mana interaction spells as possible, and I think we're trying to gate them. So yeah, your interest in this card may depend on like what you're looking to do with your design goals at the moment.
And just very briefly, I do think it's important to note. I think a lot of people compared this to, say, Fatal Push or even to Tragic Slip, and it's not. It's neither of those cards. It's a sorcery. Like, there's a huge difference between sorcery interaction and instant speed interaction. If you're just like, oh, well, I'm comparing it with these other cards, I'll make that switch. I don't think that's how I would approach this. I would look and see if you have any sorcery speed 1-mana interaction, and then compare it with this, like a Grim Bauble, because sorcery speed is just a totally different style of card when it's on removal.
All right, and so that takes us to Hymn of the Faller, and we're not going to spend much time on this one at all because none of us thought it was very good. It's 1 and a black for a sorcery. Surveil 1, then you draw a card and lose a life. And it has Void, and if you trigger Void, you draw a second card. I don't like Night's Whisper, and this is Night's Whisper that you have to work for. You get a marginal upside of only losing 1 life and getting a Surveil. But the downside is you get absolutely nothing. You just like cycle this card, and that seems terrible.
I was on a D+ for this card when I thought that Void triggered off of lands leaving the battlefield. So I'm probably on an even lower. I couldn't care less about a Night Whisper that I have to do work for.
Yeah, I have this as a D, and I would be willing to easily switch this to a D- with the softest nudge possible.
Well, okay. Here's a quick question though. I don't think Night's Whisper is available on Arena, is it?
It is.
It is. Okay. Do you guys play it?
We did for a little while, but we moved on to other cards because we just don't find it interesting nor particularly good.
Okay, I know that a lot of people still are on Night's Whisper as, a very good Peasant card. I don't know how I feel about it. I haven't gotten to play with it. It hasn't been in a modern retail set. I have a hard time believing that in retail it's all that good, but I could be wrong about that. So it's possible that I'm underrating this when Void is turned on, but the fact that you will sometimes not be able to turn it on, to me, is like just unacceptable.
Yeah, when every card is a 2-for-1 that just naturally makes a bunch of game objects for you and puts you up cards, I don't really see why we're excited about that. Like it gets, when you get to cards like Stock Up or Brain Surge or something like that, where you're getting some serious selection, I think you start getting some upside. But just a straight card for 2-card exchange is just something I would rather do with creatures and enchantments at this point.
Agreed.
Okay. So speaking of 2-for-1 game objects, that takes us to Dubious Delicacy, which is 2 and a black for a artifact food. It has flash. When this artifact enters, up to 1 target creature gets -3/-3 until end of turn. And you can sacrifice it, pay 2 mana to gain 3 life. You can also pay 2 mana and sacrifice it to make an opponent lose 3 life. I am not super high on this card, but I will acknowledge that is largely because I can't help but compare it to Nowhere to Run, and seeing an entire extra mana for the marginal upside, or what I consider marginal upside on this, is really difficult for me to get around. I'm not even sure that's fair to this card because it's not comparing it to its own sake. It's comparing it to a Peasant All-Star level card.
Yeah, I think that's, we've in the past compared cards to, say, Marionette Apprentice, and it's like, well, yeah, that best-in-class effects are best-in-class for a reason. I would not say that Dubious Delicacy is a best-in-class black removal spell, but in this kind of zone of black interactive spell that leaves a relevant permanent behind, I think it's very strong, and I think it's probably better than multiple other removal spells I'm currently playing. I put a couple other comps in here in addition to Nowhere to Run, which I agree, the Nowhere to Run comp isn't great for this card, but I think Nowhere to Run is a B-level removal spell. So I added a couple comps, Bake into a Pie and Savor. I played both of these cards. I played them in part because I have both like artifact themes and food themes in my environment. And if you think about it, I think that Dubious Delicacy kind of compares actually reasonably favorably to both those cards, especially Bake into a Pie, which is 4 mana to destroy any creature at instant speed, and then you make a food. Savor is 2 mana to give a creature -2/-2, and then make a food. This is 3 mana to give a creature -3/-3, and then make a food. Except for it's not. And I think this is a really important point, is that you're getting something better than a food. And I think it's significantly better than a food. There's a card that we got back in Wilds of Eldraine. Yeah, Ariat's Tempting Apple.
Is it the Witch?
No,
the Apple.
Ariat's Tempting Apple, which was 4 mana for an artifact that ETB gain control of target creature and opponent controls until end of turn. It gains haste. And then it had the same effect where you can spend 2 mana to either make an opponent lose 3 life or or make an opponent lose 3 life, or make you gain 3 life. And that played out way better, way better than food. The idea that you can, that modality is very relevant, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And so this is not simply, the next removal spell in the line of Savor to bake into a pie, because the object that you're getting is, I think, kind of twice as valuable as a regular food. So for me, the style of effect has been incredibly strong for us lately. I think this compares pretty favorably to 2 removal spells I was already playing in Savor and Bake into a Pie. So I think it's really solid. I give it like a C-. I don't think it's necessarily a card that every deck plays, but I think if you care about object permanence, if you care about artifacts, pretty easily you're going to run this, and I think a lot of other decks will end up running it as well.
Yeah, we are currently on Savor, and I will say to this card's credit, yeah, you're paying more mana for it, but the stat line of 3 toughness, we've mentioned, has become much, much bigger, to the point that it feels like dealing 1 damage is really good, or 1 toughness is really good to deal with, and 3 toughness you can deal with. Those kind of removal spells are both really effective. I have found the shock sort of effects to be a little less good as of late with all the 2/3s running around.
Agreed.
So, I mean, there is a possibility that you could also, does need to be mentioned, this is an actual physical magic card, so you can do all the things that you can do with a physical magic card, with picking it up, bouncing it or whatever. So yeah, maybe this is a card that I'm a little low on, and I might be willing to come up to like a C- C level card. I probably am comparing it unfavorably to just an all-star, and that's not really reasonable to this card.
Well, we also, and we're cheating a little bit. We do have access to a few days of Edge of Eternities retail, and this has been a standout in the retail environment, though that's not surprising. I would have expected this to be a standout in the retail environment. So, it's still very much, we have a lot of options like this these days. It's a little bit choose your own adventure, but I think it will stand up well in the whole Skyfisher / artifacts matter space that we find ourselves in these days with Peasant.
All right, so then that takes us to Scrounge for Eternity, which is 2 and a black for a sorcery. As an additional cost to cast the spell, you sacrifice an artifact or creature, and then you return target creature or spacecraft card with mana value 5 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield and create a lander token. I debated for a second there whether I actually need to say the word spacecraft, given how they've been. But yeah, do you want to take this one? Because I do see the vision here, but I'm also not really into it. I get what's going on here. It's probably pretty good considering you can get an advantage on your mana, but again, probably unfair. But comparing this to Peasant All-Star back for seconds, it does not look particularly compelling.
Yeah, so and also people that have paper cubes can probably skip through this portion of the review because it doesn't stand up to paper options like Reanimate or Animate Dead. I think is a Peasant card as well. So
yeah, but you're a psychopath if you're playing those cards.
Sure, yeah. So I mean, I think this is mostly an arena only concern. When I originally saw this, I was super excited because 3 mana. If you kind of view the sacrifice a piece of material and get a lander as minimally breaking even, it won't always break even, but it'll often, I feel like oftentimes you might even want the lander more than the thing that you're sacrificing, or you're sacrificing a thing for value or whatever else. So if you kind of ignore those 2 portions of the text, which you can't totally, but if you do, then 3 mana for Reanimate anything is really exciting on Arena in Peasant. The problem is it's not anything, actually. And I think that if this said 6 or less, I would be way higher on it because that touches all of the Lord of the Rings cyclers. That would make this so much cooler as a Peasant card. But the fact that it only hits 5 or less means that the primary cards, another example would be the OTJ Armadillo that's 6 mana and puts itself into the graveyard. So many of the really cool creatures that you're hoping to reanimate that put themselves in the yard are 6 mana value or higher. And I think that ultimately sinks this card for me. If this said 6 or less, I would be very excited about adding this. It almost in my mind creates a little bit of an archetype to itself, but the 5 or less text is really punishing. And I agree with you. Back for seconds, or even the one that you guys play that I've been playing lately that you can
Lively Dirge.
Yeah, Lively Dirge. I think those cards are probably at the moment better Peasant cards. If we get the Lord of the Rings style land cyclers that cost 5, then I think this becomes a really exciting option.
Yeah, I think if it were 6 or less, we would be approaching fixed Victimize territory, because Victimize is technically on the client at Peasant, but again, it's one of those cards that if you're playing Victimize, I have questions is all I'm saying. But this card would be really, really cool if it could get the land cyclers. But as it is, just technically you can get a mana advantage, but most of the time, unless you have a very strong discard package, you've got your Shoreline Looter running, or you've got, Scrapwork Mud or something to discard the 5-mana card, you're going to be playing the game for quite a while before you're able to get any value off of this card. And I think these cards need to do some really heavy lifting when they're such bad opening hand cards.
Agreed.
So last up, I've got a card, and I can't remember if I added this last one or if you did, but first up we have Hilderblade, which is a single black mana for an equipment artifact. Equipped creature gets +3/+1, and it has Void. So if you trigger Void, you attach this equipment to target creature you control, and it has an equip cost of 4. So my thoughts on this, and I haven't had a chance to play it. I don't think Tim and I decided to run it. But if you support some sort of proactive, aggressive black deck, this should, in theory, be like 1 mana and then it equips every single turn pretty much. And your opponent can, use sorcery speed removal. But then, you just keep playing the game and it's going to equip in a turn, and or maybe, 2 turns at most when you're attacking your opponent. And so basically all of your creatures are going to be able to keep getting +3/+1. It's in step, so it's a little awkward, but if you're trading off the creature that has the Hilderblade, that's pretty decent. On a reassembling skeleton, for example, it makes it a 4/2, which is like a reasonable threat to ship in with. Not a card that I think is necessarily crazy powerful, but +3/+1 for 1 mana, assuming we don't end up having to pay the equip cost too often, is pretty decent. Now the equip cost is abysmal though. I will admit that.
Now that I've learned that Void isn't triggered on lands leaving the battlefield, I'm definitely much lower on all of the cards that say Void. But I don't know. What you described, could come up. The other thing that could come up is you only have 1 creature, and then that creature trades off, and now there is, it's really hard for you to get this back onto a creature again. So I'm generally just pretty off of equipment that don't give you any other value, unless they're kind of win the game style cards, and I just don't see this as being a win the game style card. But I don't know, maybe I'm too low on it. 3 power is a lot. There's some combos you could try to pull off with Stick Twister, or putting this on your bat or something like that. So it's not 0, but I think that Void clause is a little bit harder to pull off than probably it might seem at first.
Yeah, and I haven't had a chance to really play around with the Void cards, so in my mind when I read Void, I have it as very easy to trigger, but I'm not actually sure if that's the case. So yeah, this would be one that I think even if it is easy to trigger, you still have to want that style of deck. You have to want a I'm attacking you deck that also has resiliency in the form of creatures that either make creatures when they enter, die into creatures, reanimate into creatures, that sort of thing. So kind of some specific things here, but I wanted to call that one out just as a kind of nifty card for it'll probably fit into somebody's cube environment. And Daneelius, did I add this last one or didn't you?
I added this one just last night, actually. So again, a little bit of cheating based on the set being out already and getting to watch it a little bit. So this is Felgrab Ship, 2 and a black for a 3/2 artifact spacecraft. This is our first spacecraft of the review. It's an uncommon. When this spacecraft enters, mill 3 cards, then return a creature or spacecraft card from your graveyard to your hand. It has Station, which says you can tap your creatures to add charge counters to this based on the power of the creature, and you can do that as a sorcery. Once it gets to 8 charge counters, it gets flying and lifelink, and it does turn into that 3/2 creature. So the reason I added this, a couple of reasons. Number one, we have basically no spacecraft on the document. I thought it would be interesting to just talk about a few. And This has been, along with one other that I added, one of the best performing cards in the set so far. So I do have to stand up a little bit. I have to, take notice a little bit when I see that happening. It's got good opening hand stats. It's got good drawn stats. So it seems like in the retail environment, at least, it is just a good card. And that's notable because most of the spacecraft in the retail environment have not been good cards. Most of them have been somewhere between C- and F level territory. So the fact that there are a couple of cards that have performed pretty well, I think is worth at least taking note of. Now, the clear comparison for this card is Carrion Cruiser, which is a vehicle from Aether, also 3 mana. It enters and mills 2 cards and then returns a creature or a vehicle, I believe, from your graveyard to your hand. And that has crew 1. And so the difference here is you're getting 1 extra mill, which matters quite a lot. It makes it a much more reasonable opening hand card. You might be able to just play this on curve and get a creature back, which
one more mill, also known as 50%.
Exactly, yes. So that's a huge, that is a really meaningful upgrade, but it's a meaningful downgrade in the sense that will this ever turn into a creature in Peasant? I as opposed to retail. I don't know. That's the part that to me just seems so hard to believe. So I'm not I don't know. I'm thinking about testing it just to see, just because I don't want to totally write off the card type as I did before, given the fact that yes, it has been so effective in retail. But there are just more ways I imagine of synergizing around this in retail that are boosting its stats. So I don't know. I mostly just wanted to call it out because it's been performing so well, and this could be one of those cards that we look back on in 6 months and we're like, wow, how did we miss that entirely? But I'm so skeptical of this card type and this ability that I don't know.
I think one thing it's also really important to remember is that retail is designed in such a way that there's frequently not competition for these effects, right?
Yep.
You get the version of that effect that is in the set.
Yep.
And if that version or if that effect is something that is just historically always good, it'll probably be good in retail. But like, for example, one of the go-tos would be Plasma Bolt in this set is a sorcery, right? It's I think we have it on the dock. But it's a shock effect at sorcery speed. But in Peasant, we're running a bunch of instant speed versions of this effect. So you like tap your dudes, you get your guy going, and you're going to use the lifelink to undo the damage you took for trying to crew it. And then your opponent's just like, all right, play with fire, and you move on with life and crap a little bit.
Yeah, one thing, there's a couple things to note with this that I think are kind of cute. One is that, at least my understanding of how this card works, is that 3/2 is its base power toughness, so that if you have a way to animate it with like +1/+1 counters, or if you can somehow animate this thing, I think its base power toughness would be 3/2 unless you're modifying that already. So there's some cute things you could do with this. But yeah, I have a hard time believing that even 50% more mill makes this a better option than Carrion Cruiser. And it's not like Carrion Cruiser for me was like an all-star or anything. It's just a nice synergistic piece. It's an artifact that also cares about the graveyard, whatever. So I might test this out just to give Spacecraft a fair shake, but I have a hard time believing.
Yeah, this guy carries a Hilder Blade pretty well.
There you go, yeah.
All right, so that will take us into red, and we're going to start with a pretty interesting one, actually. So this is Kavaran Harrier. It is a single red mana for an artifact creature. It's a 2/1, and when it attacks, you may pay 2 mana. If you do, create a 2/2 colorless robot artifact creature token that's tapped and attacking, and you sacrifice that token at the end of combat. And all three of us had this at a C-level card. I'm a little skeptical when you have to pay mana to get temporary bodies, especially. But, you're getting your curve out. It's an artifact for all the artifact synergies. It makes artifacts for artifact synergies. Like, I think there's some interesting stuff going on here. My one complaint, and I do think this would have made the card a little bit, obviously a little bit better, is that it doesn't happen at the beginning of combat, so you can't stack the triggers in such a way that you can pay 3 mana to make a 3/1 with Zokin's Smelter in play. Now, very minor thing, but that would have been a sick curve of turn 1 this, turn 2 Smelter, turn 3 make a dude, sack it, make a 3/1. Yeah, you can't do that, but I do think there's something here with this card, especially given the number of like the Molten Gatekeeper and Albed Scavenger or Albed Salvager type effects that we have going on. It's a way to trigger Void and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, there's fewer Savannah Lions with upside in red than there are in white. That's I think one thing to know. Context is we've talked a number of times about how we're all a little bit down on the Savannah Lions template, largely because there's so many a lot of X1 hate. There's a lot of 1/1s running around, and I do think that diminishes the value of this card versus where Savannah Lions was, say, 10 years ago. But they keep on printing Savannah Lions with better and better upsides. And if you compare this to, say, Embereth Veteran, for instance, I think this is clearly better than Embereth Veteran. How does it compare to Grease Wrench Goblin? They seem kind of similar to me in that they're both cards that synergize in slightly different ways with the rest of your environment while being these Savannah Lions. Same for Norin, Swift Survivalist. So there's some options now for Savannah Lions. I don't think that necessarily any of them are in a vacuum way better than the others, other than Embereth Veteran, I think is definitely the weakest right now. But that being said, if you care about artifacts, if you care about token generation, then I think this is a reasonable option versus, say, Norin or even Grease Wrench. So, C for me in that I can't imagine I'm cutting this from many of my really assertive red decks while also getting some juice in my artifact decks. But I just, I want to temper my excitement for Savannah Lions because I do think that those are no longer the most impressive 1-drops in Cube.
Yeah, I'm going to say that this is a card that we included in our Cube, but that I will probably never put in my deck, because even when I draft what should be aggressive decks, I try to find ways to turn them into mid-range decks. That's just something I end up doing a lot. That being said, next card, I haven't had a chance to look at this data, so I'm hoping it's good. But this was one of the most interesting, exciting cards in the set for me. Peasant, it's just a 2-mana 4/3. So that's Terra Pact Intimidator. It's 1 in a red for a 2/1, but that's a lie on the stat line. When it enters play, target opponent may have you create 2 lander tokens. If they don't, put 2 +1/+1 counters on this creature. Now, in our mainline review, I was still pretty excited about this card, but I stated that I felt like you needed to be able to be a deck that could get value off of both ends of this card. So you needed to have either a card like Legion Extruder that allows you, that's basically like a more powerful Sokinzen Smelter, or you needed to have a card like, be like a Gruul deck that had like a top end of a curve where you would have mana sinks. At Peasant, I think this is just a 4/3, right? How many decks are you drafting in Peasant that your opponent can just give you 2 artifacts and it not end horribly for them?
Well, okay, so 2 things. One, it has been Red's best card, best Peasant card in the set. Red is arguably the worst color in the set, and so it's kind of raw data isn't that impressive, but just as the best performing red card in the set, I think that's notable, but not that surprising. To answer your question, I've heard a lot of talk about this of like, well, you can't do that, and so it's basically just a 2-mana 4/3. I don't think that's really quite right. Cortical's actually had his format update or primer or whatever come out a couple days ago after playing with the set for a few days, and his comment is that like sometimes you just can't do that. Like you don't always have the removal spell in your hand. You don't always have the creature in play that can easily trade off with the 4/3 that comes down so fast. Sometimes you do just have to give them the landers, and regardless, I think it's kind of irrelevant in my mind. The reason why we've talked about it in those terms is our brains want to be able to kind of say, well, can we just shortcut this and say it's a 2-mana 4/3 and then rate it based on that? And I don't think you can. The point is, it is worse than a 2-mana 4/3, and it's worse than a 2-mana 2/1 that makes 2 landers on ETB, but it's not that much worse than either of those effects. The key is that it's a Punisher card, yes, but where both sides of the card are very, very strong. That's really all that matters to me. I don't think trying to figure out the percentage of the time that you're getting landers versus counters is really that important. The point is, it's just a really efficient card, and I think in basically any deck, you're going to be happy with its output. I don't think it matters that much. If you're not synergizing with artifacts and you play this on turn 2 and your opponent somehow has sussed out the fact that you can't, I mean, how would they have done that? I don't know, but like, let's imagine they've sussed that out and they give you 2 landers and you're an aggro deck even, you're still going to be able to find ways to make value out of those objects. So I think the card is just really, really strong and a clear include for me in my red section.
Yeah. This was one of the most interesting and exciting cards in the set for me. And maybe it's unfair. You're probably right that it's unfair to say that they can never give you the landers. But maybe a better way to phrase it would be that I don't think you're ever sad with either version of this card.
Correct. Yes, I think that's what's most important. So when you see, if you're an old school Magic player and you've seen Punisher effects over and over again, you're like, Punisher is just always worse than it seems. Like, okay, kind of, but have you seen Osseous Stick Twister in play? It's like, that's a card with the Punisher ability on it, and it's really, really good because it doesn't matter what they choose, you're getting a really good effect. And I think that's the point here. No matter what they choose, you're getting a great card. It's just a very good card.
Yeah, and I actually really like these style of Punisher effects because a lot of the old Browbeat style effects were like, all right, well, if your opponent's at 15, taking 5 damage isn't that big of a deal, right? It kind of is, but it's not a huge deal. Whereas like a lot of these cards now are just kind of like, okay, either way you pick this, it's going to be pretty good for me, but it's more marginal, right? It's not like, all right, here's a quarter of your life total. It's, do you want to let me drain 2 or do you want to sack a permanent? Do you want to give me a 4/3 or do you want to give me 2, a 2/1 and some artifact tokens? And like, I think the fact that maybe would it be a way of saying that like the output is lower? I don't know if I'm phrasing this right, but like kind of the top end is a little lower, but the consistency of these cards are much higher now when we see them.
Sure. Yeah, and I mean, the basic way I think about this, kind of similar to Umbral Collar Zealot. In fact, I might just do it right now. I just can't imagine, if I see this early in a pack in draft, I'm going to be interested. I could definitely imagine taking this as my first red card. So yeah, but I agree with what you're saying. It's not, the two options aren't so wildly different in terms of their impact on the game. Both are, one is power and toughness, but power and toughness can often be value when it forces your opponent to play in a particular way, and 2 mana for 4/3 worth of stats, it definitely is going to force your opponent into playing a certain way that they didn't want to have to originally. So yeah, no matter which end you get on this, it's going to be effective.
Yeah, and one of the most common criticisms is, well, if you play a 2 mana 4/3, can't you just kill it and move on? And yes, the answer to that is yes, of course.
Yes.
You can, your opponent can kill it. However, one thing to remember that is becoming increasingly clear as Magic becomes more and more powerful is that you don't have unlimited Doom Blades even if you draft 7 of them. You could put 7 Doom Blades in your deck, you're still going to have target selection. And if you're using your 2 or 3 mana removal spell on a 2-drop, that means that the 4-drop that they play later is more likely to stick, and that's a net benefit. So in that case, the stats pushing the issue on needing a removal spell is a huge benefit.
Stats matter a huge amount. Yes.
Okay, so that takes us to Weft Stalker Ardent. It's 2 and a red for a 2/3 Drix Artificer, and whenever another creature or artifact you control enters, this creature deals 1 damage to each opponent and has Warp for a red. Now, originally, I did not have this. I had this pretty unfavorably compared to Molten Gatekeeper because that card, you have to pay 3 mana up front for it, but you get to unearth it later for, I believe, a single mana. And that is a great benefit on that card. However, and it's an artifact itself, which has got its own layer of synergies. Tim did point out to me that this card triggers off of other artifacts entering, and I'm not sure if that's better than Molten Gatekeeper, but it is interesting, and it's adding a Reckless Fireweaver to your card, it opens up a number of synergies that maybe weren't there previously. So I think this card is far more interesting than my initial grade probably would have suggested.
Yeah, this is a new thing, right? Like, I don't. Do we have an example of one of these draining cards that drains on both artifacts and creatures? I should have done this research.
I don't believe so.
But I think
I believe the answer is no, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, I mean, for that reason alone, to me, I think even comparing this to Gatekeeper is wrong because it's doing a new thing. It gets to play in new spaces, like in my environment where I'm imagining like a red-green food deck, for instance, where I'm just making tons of food and I'm draining as the food are entering. Like, that's exciting. Or putting this in a black-green, splashing this in a black-green food deck, for instance. Like, this card seems nuts to me, and I don't use the nuts word lightly. Now, I want to be clear. That doesn't mean to me that I think it's like a first pickable card. It does require synergy, but the more I think about it, it's like, what does your red deck look like, at least in my cube, where this isn't going to be pretty effective? Red-green monsters is probably an example where you don't want this, where you're just like 4 power matters or whatever. This isn't going to be that effective, but are you going wide with creatures in like a white-red deck? This is going to be great. If you're playing a white-red deck that's more focused on, say, job select cards, like you play your job select card and you drain them for 2 when this is in play, like that's awesome.
Yeah. This card is amazing in the white game object decks that I've been super into lately. This card is like actually just insane in those decks. I was playing Coruscation Mage last week and it was basically doing this, and this is like it's pretty comparable. To what it's worth, we are now running like 4 of these effects, between Coruscation Mage, Gatekeeper, Sharpshooter, and this guy. We're now running like 4 of these effects in red because we've come to the conclusion that these are just red's best effects for being able to stay into longer games.
Well, and a huge thing here is that in a card we're going to talk about a little bit later, red does not have great options in terms of pumping up their team. Like if you're doing red, white, go wide, for instance, in my environment for the past few months, the card that you've been looking for in red, white, go wide in red is Painter Studio, because that's one of the only ways that red has to actually buff your go wide tokens or whatever when they come down. But now red has Sharpshooter and Gatekeeper and Ardent, and I'm realizing it's like you don't care in red about buffing the creatures once they come down. You're winning the game just by generating the objects. But I agree with what you're saying. It's like, I do think you want to be mindful of how many of these effects you're playing. I do think that with 4 of these in your environment or whatever, then you could be juicing white, red, go wide a little bit harder than you want to. So that's just something to keep in mind. But yeah, I think this card's doing a new thing, which is awesome for Cube, and I think it's just very strong. Any deck that is making game objects is going to be very happily slamming this. So I mean, I give it like a C in the sense that I can't imagine decks still that aren't going to run it, but I think when it gets run, it's going to be really effective.
Yeah, I've come up a ton on this one. Like, I initially thought it was like the 3rd best version of this effect, and now I'm just like, oh wait, is this actually just sneaky the best version of this effect?
It might be.
Very excited to play with this one, and it fits exactly like where we want. Painter Studio is a good shout with these go wide decks too, because one of the things that that I've been realizing is that trying to play a traditional cube linear aggro deck in your peasant deck, unless you're really low to the ground, so maybe it's a little different in your deck, but like in our environment, you need to have ways to grind. You need to have ways to make the game go longer, to have ways to beat your opponent once they've kind of gotten stabilized. And cards like Painter Studio, like these Weft Stalker Ardent Pinger effects and the Blood Artist effects and all that, those are ways to do that inside of those colors. So yeah, I think these are becoming increasingly important.
Real quick aside on that, for maybe this is a good topic for an episode, but one of the things I really enjoy when I'm drafting the super low to the ground kind of linear aggro decks is making sure I'm drafting a sideboard that lets me get bigger, because I agree with you. There's just some decks that can kill all your things, and it's really difficult for you to just be an all-out linear aggro deck. Being able to side into a more mid-range deck is definitely something I'm interested in. But yeah, anyways, one other note on this. We haven't even talked about the warp cost on this, and yeah, I think that definitely enables potential combo turns that I'm not even sure I can conceptualize right now, but I can't imagine that I mean, similar to how Gatekeeper, you could often unearth it and then deal a bunch of damage. You basically can do the same thing with this, with the warp cost. So
I'm gonna include a terrible card when I make this when I do this. So understand that I'm doing this just for the sake of content. But do you remember the card Tameo Meets the Story Circle?
Oh yes, I do.
How sick would your turn 3 be to just warp this, play that, discard your hand, and like dome your opponent for 10?
I kind of dig it. But I don't know if I dig it enough to play with Tameo Meets the Story Circle. But yeah, I kind of dig it.
I actually, one of our players made a cube that's like just very, very synergistic. It's got like a rare bonus sheet on it. But he included Tameo Meets the Story Circle. And as bad as I know that card is, every time I saw that card resolve in his cube, I was just like, man, the layered synergies in this cube are just making that card look incredible. He was getting like all kinds of discard triggers and artifact triggers. And, he was really using the whole buffalo on that card. But yeah, that card is really bad, but it's a 6 synergy card.
We're getting a new madness ability in the Spider-Man set. So, spoiler alert. So maybe I
haven't seen that.
Maybe Tameo Meets the Story Circle's time to shine, but yeah, we'll find out.
All right, so these last few cards, I don't know if these are quite as exciting, but let's start with Slag Drill Scrapper. So it's a single red mana for a 1/2 artifact creature, and you can pay 2 and tap it, sacrifice another artifact or land, draw a card. This is one that Tim and I passed on, but honestly, I kind of like it. I just think that it's a little bit narrow in a way that probably isn't good enough for us, but like, this is a improved version of a different. Was it the Mom card? Is that the Scrap Chomper?
Yeah, Scrap Chomper. Yep.
Yeah, but making this an artifact, and I believe this one can sack.
It just gets an extra toughness. It's a 1/2 instead of a 1/1, and it's an artifact. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Do you want to take this one? Because I think you're probably more interested in it than we are. But yeah, really cool card.
I'm gonna test it. There's a couple things I really like about it, and they're the things that are different than Scrap Chomper, which is the fact that it's an artifact and the fact that it's a 1/2. I really appreciate the 1/2 stat line on 1 mana creatures. The fact that they can just block 1/1s, I think, is really relevant. The fact that they don't get swept up when your opponent casts their sweeper effect or their shrivel effect or whatever, I think is very relevant. Scrap Chomper for me was not a card that was super far off. It was just the fact that it didn't really synergize as well as I wanted it to, and it got eaten up by the -1/-1 effects. To me, made it a little bit too weak. But to me, this is the kind of card, kind of going back to what we were saying before, that you want to play potentially in your low to the ground decks. Maybe not your super linear aggro decks, but in your cheap decks to give you more game against the slower decks, help you grind into the late game. Dockside Chef is a card that I like a lot, that I don't really think on average I'm activating that card more than a couple times a turn. Now that can sacrifice creatures, and this kind of can't sacrifice creatures, except for there's a lot of creatures that are also artifacts. So I think that effectively this is a card that Red doesn't really have access to right now in a cubable form, and giving it this is really exciting to me. Now maybe we'll find out it's just not good enough. But one other thing I want to call out is, and we'll get into this a little bit later, I am trying to support a red-green kind of landfall deck in my cube based on a lot of the cards we're getting in this set. And one of the things that those decks, I assume, will struggle with is you're putting all these lands into play, and then unless you're willing to throw in a bunch of expensive creatures, which I've come down and down and down on over the last few months, how are you leveraging the fact that you're making all these lands? And something like Slag Drill Scrapper, in my mind, is one of the ways to do that. So yeah, I think 1 mana card has a lot of synergy potential. I'm definitely intrigued by it. I don't think it's amazing, but I give it like a C-, and I'm going to test it this season.
Yeah, now your initial thought for when you hear that might be, well, we'll just play Choco Comet, but 540 cube and there's only one Choco Comet.
Exactly, yeah. I play that too.
Next up, there's Memorial Team Leader, and I think this is another U card, right?
It is, and again, I added it for the reason I was talking about before, about Red not really having a lot of cubable ways to pump their teams. This is 3 in a red for a 4/3 Cavu Soldier uncommon. During your turn, other creatures you control get +1/+0, and it has warp for 1 and a red. This has been a reasonably good performer so far, especially among top players in Edge of Eternities, retail limited. And yeah, I think not a whole lot to say. There's not a lot of ways of pumping your creatures in red that aren't like trumpet blast effects, and I don't think that really any of those are particularly playable in Cube. This one might be, but do I like a 4-mana card that doesn't protect itself and doesn't really have an ETB? I mean, it kind of does because it boosts the rest of it. It has some haste power here, so that is relevant, and the fact that you can warp it in for your big finishing turn is relevant. I doubt that it gets there, but I really just wanted to call it out because there's so few cards like this for red that are close to playable that pump your go wide boards.
Yeah, sure. So that takes us on to Vault Guard Trooper. This is 4 and a red for a 5/5. At the beginning of your end step, if you control 2 or more tapped creatures, you may discard your hand. If you do, draw 2 cards. So a couple of hoops to jump through here. Not a great stat line, a little expensive, but it does have the ability to potentially just be like draw 2 extra cards a turn.
Yeah, and I don't know. I'm pretty skeptical on this. I saw draw 2 cards on a creature, and I'm like, all right, on a red creature, it's like you have to pay attention to that. But I think the hoops are enough that this is not cubable. But it wouldn't really. This is a card I put on the document to see how it performed in retail because it's the kind of card I can imagine surprising people and being like, whoa, I never realized that you just play it and immediately draw 2 cards, and that would make it. If it was ETB draw 2, it would be fantastic. It's obviously not that, and so I don't think it's cubable in the end. It hasn't been a great performer in the retail environment, but I'm going to keep my eye on it, and if it comes up the 17 lands rankings over the next few weeks, then I could imagine maybe testing it. But I would want to see it perform well in an environment before adding it to mine, because as we've talked about numerous times, expensive creatures without cheap buyouts that don't protect themselves and don't always have an ETB are pretty unacceptable.
Absolutely. All right, and then the last card that we have in red is Litho Breaking. This is 2 and a red for an instant. Create a lander token. Then you may sacrifice an artifact. When you do, it deals 2 damage to each creature. So I think that this card is interesting because it makes a game object. It lets you sack a game object. It doesn't have to sack the lander token. You can sack a food or something like that instead, or like a creature that would die to the spell anyways, right? But we just got Fire Magic out of the last set, and that just is the best version of this effect that we'll probably see in the Force. If we see a better version of Fire Magic any time in the near future, I would be very shocked.
Yeah, it's like this is not a Fire Magic. This is an artifact or lander synergy card. It's like you got to really care about those lines of text, I feel like, on this card to be running this. And, I do care about artifacts, and I'm going to be caring about landers in the sense that I'm trying to support this red-green landfall archetype, but even with that, I just think ultimately the output here is not enough for 3 mana.
Sure. Oh, wait, I forgot. There's a couple of sneaky red cards here at the end. Okay, so Melded Moxite is an artifact for 1 and a red. When it enters, you may discard a card. If you do, draw 2 cards, so Tormenting Voice effect, and then pay 3 mana, sacrifice it, create a tap 2/2 robot creature, artifact creature token. Yeah, I mean, my thoughts on this is, there's one that encourages you to put dinosaurs in your deck, and it turns into a dinosaur, and that's really cool. And this is a robot, and robots are lame, so I'm going to let you take this one.
I like this card a lot. I think it's way better than what you're talking about. I'm not going to remember the name of that card, but yeah, it was from LCI. It had the same top line, but then it was craft with dinosaur, which is like an irrelevant ability, basically, whereas this is a very relevant ability. Like, yes, 3 mana to make a tapped 2/2 is not, incredible, but it's something. It's a creature. It definitely will come up in games. So really the comparison with this card is cards like Invasion of Mercadia or Bitter Reunion or Witch's Mark, which are all these Tormenting Voice style effects that give you something extra on top of it. I think that what this gives you extra on top is plenty good enough, especially if you're synergizing with artifacts, which I am. So if you don't care about the artifact type at all, then it's not just the artifact type on this, it also makes an artifact, which is quite relevant. So if you don't care about artifacts at all, then I think there are better options for you. But if you do, I think this definitely gets into like the top 3 Tormenting Voice effects we have access to now. And I'm running 3 right now in my environment, so I will definitely be playing with this.
Yeah, just in case anyone was at home thinking I'm being super serious. No, this card's good. making a gray ogre for 3 mana is not great. But when you slap it onto an effect that you're already like kind of interested in playing, it's at least compelling. It gives you an artifact sack trigger, 2 artifact ETB triggers. There's some stuff going on here. If they really wanted to push this, they could have just had it like be, the 3 mana sacrifice it and then have the create a tapped robot card be a separate line of text, kind of like a chromatic star, where you could, do other things with it that sack it and get the robot. But that might have been a little too good, but I think it would have made it really interesting if nothing else.
Yeah, that would have made it like experimental synthesizer adjacent, yeah.
Yeah, I think this does get into the top 3 or 4 of them with, Invasion of Mercadia, Witch's Mark, Bitter Reunion, Highway Robbery. Like, there's a bunch of good versions of this effect now, so just, like, pick the one that you like.
Yep.
All right, and then finally we have Galvanizing Saw Ship. It's 5 and a red for a spacecraft, and it has at 3 or more charge counters, so you have to put 3 power into this. It gets flying haste, and it's a 6/5. This is a solid F from me, dog. So if you want to take it and talk about why it isn't completely unplayable, I would love to hear it.
I added it because I wanted there to be a spacecraft on the document before, so we could just talk about how much of a miss spacecraft were as a type. I have since added 2 more that have been actually performing really well in the set, and this one has not been performing really well in the set, so it's an F for me too. It's a little bit surprising me, honestly, how bad it's been in the set, but yeah, it didn't get there. I thought that this was the best spacecraft for Cube coming in, but we have better ones, so yeah, don't play this card.
Interesting. I'm really surprised that you're interested in a 6 mana artifact or a 6 mana card with no buyout, and it requires you to have creatures in play and requires you to use those creatures to get anything. Well, I guess 6 damage for haste is like a lot of damage.
There's not really a lot of comps. This just kind of
strikes me as the card that I assumed you would give an F, and you gave it slightly above an F.
I give it slightly above an F. Basically, there's just not a lot of comps. What I like in cards is either really, really good efficiency, or for there to not be really comps for the effects before, so they at least make you think. Sure. There's not really a comp for this in the Peasant environment of, like, potentially Aurorix Bladewing that comes down. The problem is it's not Aurorix Bladewing, so you just can't draw that comparison. Sometimes you won't be able to activate this at all. So yeah, I'm fully out on this. I originally, like I said, I wanted to bring this up as a way for us to dunk on Spacecraft, but we have other cards that are actually kind of decent, so.
Okay, let me ask you something. I don't think this will ever come up, but if you Zoetic Glyph this, is it a 5/5 flying haster?
It would be a 5/4. It would not have flying or haste, though, because it doesn't get the flying or haste until you put the station into it. But once you put the station into it, then yeah, it would be a 5/4 flying haster.
Okay. So like it turns. So those are not innate to the card. You have to get to that many charge counters for the.
I believe that the power and toughness are quote unquote innate to the card. I could be wrong about that though. So like if you have a way of if you have a card that's like, I'm trying to even think what it would be. You'd have to be a way to animate an artifact that doesn't change its base power and toughness for the 6/5 to matter. But yeah, I think it's irrelevant because you're not playing a 6 mana card and then animating it with another effect. So yeah.
Sure. That was more just like a rules question around station in general, because this is why we keep Tim around people. He knows these things.
Yeah,
he's aware of how these things work. All right. So that takes us into green, and we're going to start off with, honestly, I think this card kind of sucks. It's Hemosymbic Might. It's a single green mana for a 1/1. Whenever it becomes tapped, another creature you control gets +X/+X, where X is the creature's power. And I think on its own, especially if you don't have like vehicle, spacecraft style synergies to force tap it, it's really, really bad. But like, it does get kind of interesting if you're able to put some sort of power buff into it, whether that be equipment or counters or whatever. But that just seems like a lot of work for what's ultimately kind of just a beatdowny kind of card.
Yeah, I mean, I had this as a D+. I would probably go down even further on that now that I've seen it a little bit more. It's purely a synergy card if you have a lot of ways to tap your creatures outside of combat. That's how I think about it. If you do, then it could be quite strong. But my environment does not have plethora of ways of tapping your creatures outside of combat. As an aggro creature, I think green has much better options at this point, even one later on in the set.
Yeah, I think the most interesting thing about this card is with vehicles, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you can crew them mid-combat even if they're already crewed. So like you can crew your vehicle, attack, and then hold this up as a combat trick at instant speed to blow, to keep your opponent's blocks awkward.
Yep, and it's good with saddle, and yeah, the more effects you have like that, the better this gets, certainly. But I don't think that there's many Peasant Cubes out there that are running a whole ton of vehicles and saddle creatures, especially in green. I don't think that's a very common occurrence.
Sure. That takes us to another slightly less mediocre one drop in Edge Rover. So this is a single green mana for a 2/2 artifact creature with reach, and when it dies, each player creates a lander token. Now, there are a few things in Magic that I hate more than giving my opponent stuff. However, I will say stat line on this, 2/2 for 1 mana is pretty decent. Reach is actually very relevant in green. A lot of times you're going to die to flyers. It's part of why Atsakan Archer is so good in green, is it's a reach creature with a relevant combat ability, or with a relevant ability. And I will say, like, being an artifact, you can get some extra synergies out of this with stuff like, so Kinza Smelter, this makes 2 game objects for that to sack and turn into 3/1 hasters. Like, there's stuff you can do with this. You can also, like, Zoetic Glyph it and things like that. I'm not super sold on this one, but I think this is at least good enough on its own merits, especially if you have synergies for it, that you could consider putting this in your cube.
I'm super sold on this. I think it's awesome. I think that I have a hard time imagining a deck that isn't minimally going to be really excited to sideboard this card. The fact that it has reach, 1 mana for a reach blocker that stops all their little, dumb 1/1 flying tokens on the other side of the board, I think is like really meaningful. I have Jaspar Sentinel on my list right now. It's leaving for a card we're about to talk about, but that being a 1/2 reacher has been very relevant. It stops their the 1/1 flyers, the 1/1 flyer lifelink in white for 1 that has Descend. That's really good. The Ruin Lurker Bat, I think is what it's called. The 2-drop 1/1 bat in black that Thoughts uses them. Deep Cavern Bat. It's like all those cards just get blocked by this very easily. The fact that it gives green more artifact synergy potential. Tim wrote in here how it works with Sekenzen Smelter, or maybe not. No, that was you. But the fact that this gives you 2 artifact objects for your artifact matters decks, and the fact that it's just a 1 mana 2/2. It's like that's a really good stat line. Like I don't know where I'm not playing this deck. And Tim wrote in here, before I'm happy giving my opponent a rampant growth, blah blah blah. It's like, yeah, but you're getting the rampant growth too. It's like I don't really see how I can view that line of text as anything but a bonus for me, because I get to build my deck with artifact synergies in mind. Now maybe yes, it's possible that I'm playing against an opponent who also has artifact synergies, and they will also be able to make use of that token as well as I will. But in deck construction, I can basically always guarantee that I'm at least getting as much value out of this card as my opponent is likely to get, on top of the fact that it's a 1 mana 2/2 reach. Like I think this card is amazing. I think one of the better cards in the set. Can't imagine not running it in almost any green deck.
Yeah, the 1 mana 2/2 is slightly less exciting for us, but I do agree with you. I think this card's good. You've got a little higher than me. I've got like a C. It looks like you're at a C+. So like I think we're in the same ballpark of like this probably makes your deck a lot of the time. Because one of the ways your green decks die is you get run over. And so being able to just play this and trade off, and especially against an aggro opponent, if they elect to use their mana to ramp, you're probably happy with that. So it might even, I can even see spots where giving your opponent the opportunity to mess up and not curve out on you is something that is relevant. Like I said, I don't like giving my opponent something, but you are right. It is equal, and you're assuming you're going to be able to get more value out of it than your opponent, whether that be because you're green and you play big creatures, or because you have artifact synergies or whatever.
Or landfall synergies,
Yeah. I think we passed on this one, but this might be one that if it performs really well, we come back to, because again, like 2/2 reach is very relevant. There's a lot of the Mischievous Mystic style cards. Just cheap aggressive flyers are all over the place these days, and they are one of the way your green deck dies.
Yeah, it's been a top 10 Peasant card so far in the set, and given the fact that green's the best color in the set is, I think, a feather in its cap. But anyways, we don't need to make this a 17 lands podcast. Tim would be unhappy if that's the direction.
Sure, but this might be our only opportunity.
Good point. Yeah.
All right, so that takes us to Galactic Wayfarer. So that's 2 and a green for a 3/3 human scout. When this creature enters, create a lander token. Now, my initial thoughts on this were that it's just a worse version of a bunch of effects that we already had, and so I docked it, a little bit of a grade like Tim did with the Tormenting Voice in the notes. That being said, it does make an artifact and a game object and all that, and so I was considering that this might be better than I initially wanted to give it credit for. Obviously, it's no Fenrir, but it does increase green's ability to play nicely with some of the other colors, which is something to be mentioned when you're talking about cube design, is trying to keep your colors from being isolated. And when all the other colors kind of care about artifacts and green largely doesn't, green cards that make game objects, that make artifacts, are going to be better than they otherwise might initially read.
Yeah, comparing it to other 3/3s specifically that give you value on ETB for green, there's Contagious Vorak, there's Jewel Thief, there's Sticky Tongue Sentinel. Those are probably the top 3 that I was able to come up with. They're actually 3/3s on ETB. I tried Argothian Opportunist for a little while, which is a 3/2 that makes a Power Stone. I think this is significantly better than that, obviously. And how it compares to the other 3/3s, I think, it just depends a little bit on how much do you care about artifacts, how much do you care about landfall. But I think, assuming you care about those, that it's a totally reasonable option, at least versus Vorak and Sentinel. Jewel Thief, I think, might still be best in class.
Yeah, I did forget Jewel Thief exists, and that card almost certainly is better than this. There's going to be spots where this is better, but 90% of the time, 95% of the time, I'm going to assume, maybe 99% of the time, Jewel Thief's going to be better.
I think Jewel Thief is probably just best in class in general for this style of card, but I think the key thing here is it makes a lander token specifically, which fuels landfall. And so if you're trying to support landfall as a theme especially, this becomes a card that I think you kind of have to play. So that's why I'm going to be running it this season, just to see if I can make the landfall theme work. But yeah, I think we're getting to this point now in Modern Limited where you get to kind of choose your adventure with your expensive creatures that give you value on ETB, but also now in green at least, your 3-mana creatures that give you value on ETB. There's a lot of options, and I think this kind of slots in as a reasonable one that you want to be synergizing with to run.
Yeah, speaking of growing number of options, the sort of tap a thing for mana 1-drop, also getting a lot of options, including Gene Pollinator, which is a single green mana for a 1/2 artifact creature, and you tap an untapped permanent you control to add 1 mana of any color. I think this is not clearly best in class, but it is approaching that, right? It's got relevant creature, or it's got relevant typing with being an artifact. It keeps the 1/2 stat line. We lose reach, which is relevant, but the ability to tap any permanent you control instead of specifically an artifact or a creature means that you can tap like your enchantments, which there's an increasing number of. You can tap your battles or something like that. There's all like an increased number of cards that you can tap with this thing. I don't know how relevant that is, but being an artifact is a increasingly relevant upside for sure.
Yeah, I agree with you that losing reach is a big bummer. I do think that the reach on Jaspara Sentinel is really part of what makes that card so strong. But I would disagree with you. I think that the tap any untapped permanent instead of just artifact creature is. Or sorry, just instead of just creature for Sentinel, and Sentinel Stalwart is the one. Is
Sentinel not creature or artifact?
Sentinel Stalwart is creature artifact, and Jaspara Sentinel is just creature, I believe.
Okay, I got it mixed up. My bad.
But even like either one of those cards, I think this is actually quite better than one card type you can tap is an aura, say like your sleep magic or you're unable to scream. I think that the ability here is almost different enough than those cards to consider it in a separate light. I think this is just much more often going to get to act as a Birds of Paradise than those cards get to act as. And the fact that it is on a 1/2 body, that is an artifact. I love this card. I think this card's awesome, and I agree with the comment in the doc here. I think this one's from you that it's the best version of effect that you like, but isn't typically amazing. And I would agree with that. But given the fact that this taps everything and anything and everything, including your lands, just to give you, let you turn your green mana into black mana or whatever. I think this card's very exciting, even if I agree with you that like it's hard for this card to be incredible, but just in terms of what it opens up for you in gameplay, I think is really, really fascinating, and it's gonna be a lot of fun to play with.
Sure, especially if you're still on cards like roll tokens and things like that. And I assume this is also a card that probably is going to scale with Magic better, because we're getting more and more we get more artifacts, but we get more non-artifact permanents to tap as well as the game moves on. So yeah, I do like this card. I can't remember if we decided to play. I think we did. Okay, so next up, do you want to take this one, Daneelius? Because I just don't care about this card.
Sure, this is Eumidian Terrabotanist. It's very real words. 1 in a green for a 2/3 insect druid uncommon. And it has landfall. Whenever land you control enters, you gain 1 life. So this is just power creep from Kazandu Nectar Pot, which was a card from Battle for Zendikar, or one of the Zendikar sets, which was a 1/3 instead of a 2/3 that had whenever land you control enters, gain 1 life. couple things to note here. One is 2-mana 2/3. We are in this mode where five points of power and toughness for 2 mana is kind of what you have to expect these days, and so this passes that test in my mind. The key thing here for me is that this is a synergy card. There's 2 different types of decks this synergizes with. One is some sort of life gain synergies, and the other is your landfall synergies that you might be trying to support. I am very excited about the potential for a red-green landfall deck this season, and so I want to give it a try. But I don't think it's incredible or anything, but I think it's hard for it to be bad. 2-mana 2/3 that gains you 3 life over the course of a couple turns. I think you're going to be pretty happy with that most of the time, but it is not a world beater, and you do want to be synergizing with this line of text to care about it.
Yeah, if I wanted a green 2-drop that gained me life, I think I would lean towards Herbology Instructor from March of the Machine. But yeah, this is definitely, if you're trying to support landfall, it can be a signal for synergy purposes. So that takes us to Seed Ship Impact. It's 1 and a green for an instant. Destroy target artifact or enchantment. If its mana value is 2 or less, create a lander token. Card's fine. I think I'm not super interested in the naturalize effect with no other flexibility or utility, but this will get its man often enough, and if you get a cheap card, you get a 2-for-1, which is pretty nice. I really like these specific naturalizes to have buyouts, whether that be you're playing a creature or they have cycling or whatever. I don't really like it when they're locked in on you have to do the thing or it rots in your hand.
Yeah, I can understand that. I think in my environment, what I found is there's always going to be a target for this, and it's going to be relevant. And the majority of cards that you're going to be wanting to kill with this anyways are going to give you that lander. And so the card that made me realize I think I did want to add it, and I have added it for this season, was Paw Patch Formation. That is a card that has been basically a card that just gets played in food decks, pretty much, or green decks that really care about artifacts. And I think this card is going to play better than Paw Patch Formation in the generic deck that cares about artifacts in green. And then, it'll play slightly worse in your food decks, I suppose, but a lot of the food decks are pretty happy with any artifact getting made. And again, the fact that this makes a lander specifically means that it can synergize with landfall stuff. So I think this is going to play really well in my environment. I think there's going to be a lot of targets that you care about. I think you're going to get a 2-for-1 out of it the vast majority of the time. And in the cases where it doesn't, okay, it's a really strong sideboard card. So yeah, I mean, not a lot to say other than the fact that I think often it's going to be a 2-for-1, and naturalizes are important to have access to in Peasant these days. You have a few options. This might not be the one that you like the most, but I think it's going to play pretty well.
Sure. All right, and so next up is a card that exists only to remind us that no matter how much time passes, they apparently are still afraid to give us anything better than Ridgescale Tusker. So this is 4 and a green. It's Atmospheric Greenhouse. When it enters, you put a +1 counter on each creature you control. And at 8 or more, it becomes station charge counters. It gains flying and trample and becomes a 5/4. I will stick to my 5-mana 5/5 that ETBs and puts a counter on everything. But surely one day we'll get a card that comps favorably to Ridgescale Tusker.
Well, spoiler alert, but in Spider-Man, we're getting a card that dunks on this incredibly hard. So this, again, is to me more of an example of like them creating this new card type for a set and really not wanting it to be very good. So it's kind of sad to me that this is so bad, but yeah, it's very bad.
Yeah, so next up is use Social Engineering. It's 3 green for an enchantment with landfall, and when a land you control enters, create a 2/2 colorless robot artifact creature token. Doesn't come into play tapped, unlike several versions of robots in this set. And then it has warp 1 and a green. So this is a card that I find actually super interesting and compelling. Like, obviously, if you play it on turn 3, you play a fetch land, you get 2/2s, and that's like pretty good deal for 2 mana when you play your Evolving Wilds or your Landscape or whatever. But one other thing that didn't hit me at first that I'm now realizing is that this making artifacts is relevant, right? For cards like Mexico's Reign of Truth and things like that we've mentioned the benefits of making artifacts. And so even though this Chocobo Raceway, Zendikar Royal type effect isn't usually very good, the fact that we get a cheap buyout mode that we can potentially get a robot or 2 on an earlier turn, and then we can play it later, and it makes artifacts, has me thinking that this card could be something that we're interested in.
Yeah, I love this card now. This has been the card that I probably thought more about than any other card in the set. I did want to see its performance in the retail environment, and it's been pretty solid. It's like top 13, top 10, top 13 green peasant card in the set. And again, green's been the best color, so that's saying something. But yeah, the key thing about this card, by far, is the warp. If without the warp, I couldn't care less about this effect. We've seen it before. It's not been very good before. Warp changes this entirely. So baseline, you can think of this as 2 mana for a 2/2 that draws you the Social Engineering, but you have to play that 2 mana 2/2 off curve. So like on 3 mana, you can play this, play your land, you get a 2 mana 2/2. If you have some way to spend 1 mana, then you've just gotten a 2 mana 2/2 that draws a card. Now the card that you're drawing isn't amazing, but it's much more likely to be good for you given the fact that you've been able to put power and toughness into play. But where this gets exciting is the fact that you can go, okay, turn 3, I warp this, and then I play my fetch land. And there's lots of different fetch lands available to us now in Peasant. There's obviously all the MH3 fetch lands. There's the SNC SAC fetch lands. There's the just normal Terramorphic Expanse style fetches. And so when you go warp this on 3 into a fetch land, you're making 2 2/2s on 3 mana, which is going to be more than you can get, generally speaking, out of your 3 mana anyway. So you're not really playing off curve at that point. You can even imagine it doing more than that, potentially, if you set this up on turn 4 or turn 5 with a card that searches out multiple lands with, effects like there are cards that can put lands into play from the top of your deck or whatever. Like, I think there's ways that you can generate maybe even 3 tokens off of this before it even comes down for 5 mana. That's extremely exciting to be able to set up turns where you're paying 2 mana and making 2 or 3 2/2s and then drawing this into exile. So I think it's a synergy card. You do need to support this. I don't think throwing this into the average cube, even with, the 10 fetch lands from MH3 and maybe an Evolving Wilds or whatever, I think you want to be going a little bit harder than that to support this. But if you're supporting this, I think this could be a really cool signpost for a landfall strategy in your environment. And I think that this, along with a couple other landfall cards, really speak to me as a possible new archetype. So I'm going to be trying it this season and seeing how it goes.
Cool. Let us know. I talked about this with Tim. He didn't seem super interested, but if this one overperforms, this could be a card we come back to, especially since this Gruul landfall thing seems to be something they're trying to support a little more frequently, and I'm all for it. I think Gruul lands is a cool archetype. All right, so that takes us to another, I assume, unplayable card in Larval Scout Tender. It's 2 and a green for a spacecraft, and when it enters, you may sacrifice a land or lander, and then if you do, you search your library for up to 2 basic land cards and put them onto the battlefield tapped, and then if you manage to get it to 7 or more charge counters, it becomes a 3/3 flyer.
Yeah, so I added this. This is currently the number 1 performing green non-rare in the set. And when I saw that, I was like, all right, well, then we got to talk about it. So in this, for top players at least. So, and for, I think, the full player pool, it's like number 2 or something like that. So yeah, it's been very good. So, what are some comps for this card? I think Springbloom Druid is the one that comes to mind immediately, in the sense that you're paying 3 mana for both for a sorcery, sacrificing a land, getting 2 lands into play. Druid gives you a 2/1. This gives you a 3/3 spacecraft. I have to assume that on average, a 2/1 is going to be better than a 3/3 spacecraft. Probably, 3/3 flying spacecraft that costs, needs 7 power to turn on. But this is an artifact. That's something. And I think the reason probably why this is performing so well in the retail environment is the fact that you can actually sacrifice landers, which gives you a nice mana advantage. To be able to ramp for 2 on 3 mana. Imagine going Biomech and Engineer, which is a card we're going to talk about soon, which is a 2 mana creature that makes a lander on ETB, into this on 3. That feels pretty strong to me and worth doing. So to me, most likely, I'm not interested in this card unless you're playing a lot of lander cards from this set. But I'm playing a lot of lander cards from this set, so I don't think it's insane to consider this. And again, I just don't think you can ignore when you see a card like this that's performing so incredibly well in the retail environment. But I assume that there's enough kind of specific to this environment that's making this card good that it's probably not going to translate as well to Cube. But I'm intrigued at least a little bit.
Yeah, I have to assume, because like when you sack a lander to do this, you're basically getting to use this to sack the lander, which is 2 mana. So then you're basically casting another Rampant Growth for 1 mana and getting the spaceship option on top of that. And that does seem very good. Using this as Springbloom Druid in a regular cube, though, I have to imagine Springbloom Druid is just a stronger card.
Yeah, I think you're probably right.
All right, that takes care of all of The green cards, so we'll move into our multicolor section, starting with Biomechan Engineer. Excuse me, Biomechan Engineer. I've been told that this is not Biomechan. So it's green, blue for a 2/2, and when it enters, you create a lander token, and then for 8 mana, you conjure a Muldrifter. You draw 2 cards, you create a 2/2 robot creature token artifact. Doesn't come into play tapped. Yeah, so I this card's obviously good, right? It's just clearly it is a pretty solid card. It's a 2/2 for 2, which is a little below rate now. It's not actually at rate, but makes a game object, has a mana sink that pairs with the game object. That being said, this feels like a card that's like, for cube purposes, sort of feels a few years out of date. We just get better rates at lower mana costs and more easy value these days, I think. What are your thoughts? Because I'm kind of low on this at a cube purposes, even though if in the retail environment, I assume this card is crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy in the retail environment. I liken this to, say, Novice Inspector or Thraben Inspector, where you're paying 1 extra mana for 1 extra power and then this late game ability. And so I do think making that sort of comparison, the late game ability does have to matter. And I think that's the big question for me is, will this 8 mana ability ever get activated in Cube? If it does, if it in the average draft you activate it like, I don't know, 3 times or something like that, then I think that justifies this card's inclusion. Also, the fact that blue-green's gold section is just kind of janky in Cube, I think, right, in Peasant Cube right now. Like, the card that I'm adding this in my environment for this season is the Snake from DFT, which is the 2 mana 1/1 Death Touch Flyer that you can pay 4 mana to exhaust and ramp 2 and put a counter on it. That card has actually not played out nearly as well as I thought it would in Cube. It's been fine, but not great. I definitely think that what you're getting up front with this card is way better than that card. However, that card's ability is easier to pull off, certainly, than this card is. So yeah, I mean, I think that you're right to say that this is no longer as impressive as it would have been, say, 5-6 years ago, because we're just getting way more of these cards that are like 2 mana for a reasonable body and an object on ETB. But I don't really see a lot of those cards in blue-green specifically. And so I think that there's a pretty good argument for just saying this is one of blue-green's better gold cards now, even if maybe if it was red-black, it wouldn't be quite as exciting because there's more cards that do this thing. But yeah, I think overall, it seems to me to pass the sniff test of playability in Cube, and my blue-green section is... Blue-green's been the worst color the worst color pair in my environment for like forever, and so I'm always looking for things that can be tried that might prove better than previous options. So I'm gonna try it, and we'll see.
Yeah. So my kind of thoughts on this card ultimately, or in blue-green in general, I could see us coming back to this one for sure, especially if it's kind of just crushing in the retail set. And like I said, it's probably pretty good. I sort of view the blue-green section as like, Repulsive Mutation is the clear best-in-class card for blue-green, and then everything else is kind of replaceable in different levels of, like, this card's pretty decent for value.
Yeah, I think that's right. The fact that this makes an artifact makes it a little bit unique for blue-green. Blue-green has not done that very much. So, again, for my environment, that matters maybe more than for others, but that's one of the main bonuses that this card has specifically, is if you are trying to synergize with artifacts, or again with the landfall thing, which I'm going to try to do this season, then this gets more reasonable.
Sure, and it's possible we should be running this in our blue-green section, because Sultai is a deck in our cube, and like getting a little bit of extra reliable early game fixing is probably something that deck is interested in. That does take us to a card that I think is way more interesting. I mean, interesting maybe is the wrong word, but I've got a love affair with the card Swift Warkite, and I can acknowledge that, or I think that's the name of it, the Dragons of Tarkir. It's red-black for 4/4 for 6 mana. Anyways, card's a little outdated at this point, and this card kind of vibes with what that card was doing. So this is Interceptor Mechan. It is 2 black red for a artifact creature robot with flying, and it's a 2/2. When it enters, you return an artifact or a creature from your graveyard to your hand, and then at the beginning of your end step, it has Void, and it puts a +1 counter on this creature if you void it. So the obvious play pattern with this card is that you play it on turn 4, you pick up your bauble, you play your bauble, sack your bauble, and then now you've got a 3/3 that drew you a card.
Is that very good? No, that is good. It's good. Is it very good? I don't know. Like it's funny because again, color pair matters so much here. My black-red section is stacked beyond belief, and if this was like a blue-green card, I'd be like, ooh, this is exciting. But as a black-red card, I don't know. The competition is so stiff, and does black-red really need a 4-mana Gravedigger? It's like, I see the void ability on this, but does it really matter? It's like, if your Signpost 4-drop flyer is surviving for multiple turns, like, you're probably doing pretty well anyways. Like, I don't know. It's fine. I talked about Delivery Moogle in the Final Fantasy set review, and I gave that a middling grade as well, though I think it is a very cool card. It has been very fun to play with in Cube, which is what I expected it to be. I don't think it's, like, all that powerful, though, because ultimately there's just so many options these days for 4-mana plus creature that give you value on ETB. And this is another option in a long line. I don't think this is particularly compelling as a gold card. If it was mono black, if it was mono red, or if it was in a gold section that wasn't black-red, I'd be more excited about it. But I don't think it's going to crack my environment. I just think that the black-red section is really tough at this point to crack.
Sure, we're playing it, but it's more for tonk reasons. Like, we always try to try new cards, which is why we didn't put in Biomech and Engineer, and we probably will go back and do that because that feels like a card we're probably supposed to test out. So that takes us to Tanuk Memorial Ensign. Is that how you say that? 1 red-green for a 2/4, Kavu Pilot, and whenever a land you control enters, it deals a damage to each opponent, and then if it triggers a second time, you draw a card. So has the ability to give you some reach, another form of reach in your red-green deck, chip in some damage, but really you're trying to trigger this twice in a turn to turn this into a draw engine.
Yeah, and I think this is I wrote in the document that I have this as like a C-/B- in the sense that if you're not really intentionally supporting landfall in your environment, then I think this is going to be a pretty like a niche role player, where or niche role player where it deals a little bit of damage and maybe it draws a card. On the turn that you play your MH3 fetch land, you get 1 draw out of it and it deals 2 or 3 damage. And on a 3-mana 2/4 body, that's not overly compelling. I think as a signpost for an actual landfall strategy, it's much more exciting. And so the idea of playing this on 3 on turn 4, warping your social engineering, and then playing your fetch land or cracking your lander token or whatever to get the 2 pings, the draw effect, and the 2 bodies. Like now we're really talking. And so I think to me this is exciting enough that it made me want to actually actively support landfall as a strategy in red-green. Unlike the 2 landfall signposts that we got in Final Fantasy, I don't think either of those really were compelling enough as landfall signposts. I think this one is, and I'm also really hoping that we get a few more of these over the course of the next few sets, so that we can kind of beef out the strategy. But just with like this new social engineering, another card that I think is really, really strong, if you think about it as a signpost for a landfall deck specifically, is Tireless Provisioner, the landfall card, the green 3-drop that you get a treasure or a food whenever a land enters. If you're like building your deck to try to maximize landfall, then that card becomes really exciting as opposed to just a card that's already solid. It's a good card on its own, but if you're making like 4 or 5 treasures out of it, it gets really compelling. So yeah, that's my story here. I think this is compelling enough to try to build around it, see how it works. I'm hoping we get more signposts along these lines, but if you're not willing to really try to support landfall, really maximize the number of rampant growth style cards that you can squeeze into your cube, maximize the number of fetch lands you have, then I don't think it's going to be worth it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I was going to say that a card like Emergent Sequence might find a bit of new life with this sort of archetype, because then you're getting a creature on top of getting your landfall trigger, so it's an interesting option in the pool of 2-mana mana dorks. But that's a very old card at this point, I guess. All right, so that takes us to Seed Ship Broodtender. So this is black-green for an Insect Citizen 2/3, and when it enters, you mill 3 cards, and then at sorcery speed, you can pay 5 mana, sacrifice this creature, and return a creature or spaceship card from your graveyard to the battlefield. This card seems fine. That being said, it's like Tim has it mentioned here as a lazy design, and I completely agree with that. This is unbelievably boring. I also think that it's worse as a reanimation spell than Badlands Revival, or as a recursion card, it's worse than obviously Honest Rusting, but that card's broken beyond belief. And then in terms of like being an enabler / 2-drop defensive creature, I think it's obviously worse than the Duskborn Spider. So all in all, I'm not really into this. I think I would rather have either of those two other cards that I mentioned, but I'm sure this card's playable, and like if you want to put it in your cube, nobody can stop you, and it's probably going to be fine.
Yeah, I mean, I think this card seems really good to me. The problem is what you just said. There's just a lot of options. You know, comparing this to Spider is a tough comparison. I think that card is clearly better, but. Could you play two? Could you not play two mana 2/3s that give you multiple forms of value off of it? Like, I think it's hard to criticize this card, I guess, other than, like I said, the lazy design. It's obviously strong, but not as strong as some other cards we've seen. So if your gold sections are big, or if you just really want to try new cards, I think this almost certainly, in my mind, will play really well. It's just that there are other really strong options that this doesn't compare super favorably with.
Yeah, and I will say, I know earlier we were talking about the delicacy card, the food card, and we were talking about how it being a worse version than a best-in-class effect is kind of fine. Like, maybe it's being a little judgmental. I will say with gold cards, particularly in our section, because we only have room for like 4 gold cards, it does become a much bigger deal to be a worse version of the best-in-class effect, because we would rather run something that was more interesting than run like a worse version of a card in what's supposed to be your payoffs for that color pair.
Yeah, I totally agree. And again, another potential podcast episode at some point is one of the reasons why I like playing with larger gold sections and larger cubes in general is so that you can play with more of these cards. Because a sad thing to me is when I look at small cubes with small gold sections, maybe there's like 2 gold cards per pair. And that's just sad to me because there's so many cool gold cards you can play with. And that is maybe a bummer of that reality, is that cards like Root Tender just never get to see the light of day in most cubes. So yeah, but I totally agree. Best in class matters, way more for gold sections than it does for monocolored sections. And this is certainly not best in class, but it is also certainly very good. So,
Yeah, I will say also, just we could do a whole podcast episode on this, because the Jank Diver crew we're all pretty committed on the 360 at this point. Though with time, we have acknowledged there are benefits to running larger cubes. But I think one thing to mention is that you are also in the equally luxurious position of having your cube be drafted semi-regularly or regularly even. And that is a huge benefit with larger cubes, because the smaller your cube is, like the less you play your cube, the less big you need it to be, right? Because you're trying to get extra value out of more cards that are interesting to play and get more replayability out of your cube. But if you're the kind of person who builds a cube and then drafts it, once a month or less, it's really not as big of a deal.
Agreed, and all of this is just confirming that we need to have a whole podcast episode on cube sizes. But yeah, I agree.
Yeah, we can let you come on and be the dissenting voice, because we've done one of those before.
540 is objectively correct. Objectively correct.
In any case, that takes us on to the new Clarion Spirit Station Monitor. It's blue, white for a 2/2, Lizard Artificer. When you cast your second spell each turn, create a 1/1 colorless drone artifact creature token with flying, and this creature can block only creatures with flying. Now, do need to get out ahead of this and say, obviously, that being only able to block creatures with flying is strictly worse than not being able to block, than being able to block any creature. However, flip side of that, it makes artifact creatures, which is a pretty big upside, and an increasingly big upside these days, actually. So I think also that if you're interested in having a Clarion Spirit effect, you probably are interested in having 2 of them. So I think this card has some interesting niches that Clarion Spirit can't fill, while also being density for decks that maybe just want to do the Clarion Spirit tempo thing. So I would consider it kind of a side grade, but I really like the synergies that are going on here, especially with cards like Mechko's Reign of Truth, where you're taking advantage of the fact that this makes artifacts.
Well, and also, like, going back to the best-in-class discussion we just had, it's interesting when you're making best-in-class comparisons between gold cards and monocolored cards, because even if, for instance, I added Prince Imrahil the Fair to my environment, we talked about this in that unique archetypes episode. Prince Imrahil the Fair is the white and a blue 2/2 that whenever you draw your second card each turn, it makes a 1/1. And I was commenting on how, in a lot of ways, that's just a worse Mischievous Mystic, but it still is adding something really important to the cube, because it's giving you a signpost telling you, hey, do this thing in blue-white. And Station Monitor, while even if it's a worse card overall than Clarion Spirit, the fact that when you see this in draft, you're telling yourself, oh, I'm going to do this in blue-white specifically now, as opposed to just being a white card, is something that potentially could be valuable to a cube curator who's trying to create synergies. And there's also Wingblade Disciple, which is the Clarion Spirit in blue that costs 1 mana more, and otherwise it's just the exact same text. So now you have Clarion Spirit and Wingblade Disciple and Station Monitor, and that's an archetype right there. Now we're talking about being able to actually seed a theme into your environment. So so yeah, I don't think there's a lot worth commenting on the card. It's just another Clarion Spirit. We have a few now, but I think it's relevant specifically for, yes, artifact synergies, and also if you're trying to intentionally push this play 2 theme in blue-white, then it seems like the best version of this now that we have to do that as a gold card in blue-white specifically. So
yeah, and I like the shout out of the Wingblade Disciple, Clarion Spirit in this, because then you can look at this and then be like, oh, okay, there's a Clarion Spirit and a Wingblade Disciple in this cube. That's clearly something I'm supposed to be doing.
Yep.
So then the last gold card, and then we have a couple of colorless cards here. The last gold card is Memnon.
Good luck.
Memnon.
Sure. Yeah.
Sure. The Uthros Exile.
I think the MMM is silent. It's just Anon.
Anon. Yeah. The Uthros Exile. 1 blue-red for a 1/3 legendary Jellyfish Advisor. And it has flying, and whenever an artifact you control enters, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. This template's just good, right? Like, this effect just is pretty reliably good. Pairs really well with the card we just mentioned in like a Jeskai shell. But there's just infinite ways to make artifacts, especially if you look at this as kind of a Jeskai card. This card's really cool. Pairs well with Third Path Iconoclast. Pairs well with Detective Satchel. Like, there's a lot of cards now that exist that do this sort of thing. And I believe there was the LCI Pirate card that did something similar, but it had to go onto Pirates. And this is a flyer that does it onto anything.
This one's interesting. Of note, and again, close your ears, Tim, when you're listening to this, but it has not been performing well in the retail environment so far. And this is a set that doesn't necessarily make, infinite tokens, but there's a number of ways to make Thopters. And there's just a lot of kind of artifacts lying around. And so the fact that this has not been performing well so far definitely made me raise my eyebrows. I'll say that I was unsure about it when we were adding to the document, just because, yes, you're right, this template is good. However, compare it to the other cards like this, and most of them cost 2 mana. So there's like Yoshin Dissident, for instance, which has the same text box, but it's a 2 mana card. There's Builder's Talent, which kind of has the same text box, but that's a 2 mana card, and it also gives you a 0/4 on ETB and also does other things. It's like many things that it does. There's Rosy Cotton, but that one comes with that first artifact, so if they just blow up the Rosy, you at least got some amount of value on ETB. And I think that's the downside of this card, is that ultimately you play this on 3 and then you need to untap, and there's no other value it's giving you. Now, I know that for a lot of people, they're going to hear that and they're going to say like, oh, well, that's fine. Like if your 3-drop, dying is a really bad thing, then like, where are we in Magic or whatever? It's like that's okay. If they do blade your 3-drop, that's fine. I don't necessarily actually think that's true anymore. This is the problem that I had with, say, Dalkovan Pack Beast, the card from TDM, the 0/4 that when it attacks you get to mobilize 3 or whatever. My problem with that card was it's a 3-drop that they Doomblade, and then you're down on that exchange. Like depending on the removal spell they used, you are down on that exchange. So you play this, they cast their Dubious Delicacy, and you're down on that exchange, like definitely. Mm-hmm. And so that matters less for me for a monocolor card, but the fact that this is gold, that it starts to matter a lot more. So go ahead. Yeah,
and I also will say the Dalkovian Pack Beast, like obviously you want to synergize with that card, but it kind of just does the thing when you untap with it, right? Mm-hmm. So like a little different in that if you untap with it, you're at least getting to attack with it, and I'm assuming you're going to synergize with it, but even if you don't, it's still an okay attacker. This does like kind of need a couple of triggers before it's worth its mana value. Now, if only there was a 0 mana card that could trigger this the turn it came into play. If only we had one of those in Magic the Gathering.
Ornithopter, you're talking about, I think, right?
Yeah, Ornithopter, of course.
So
actually, this is good with Ornithopter.
It is true. So I am going to test it this season for one reason in particular, which is that I have big gold sections, and I really like the idea of how this pairs with TPI, Third Path Iconoclast, and with Saheeli. So both of those cards have had kind of checkered histories in my cube, in the sense that they are so weak as like your main payoff in your deck to -1/-1 effects or 1 damage effects. So the number of times that somebody's been like, okay, I'm building my deck around TPI, I play my TPI, I make a bunch of 1/1s, and then the opponent casts Fear Fire Foes, or like in your guys' environment, Fire Magic, has been so high that I've just come down on TPI a lot. And the fact that when you get this in play, now suddenly every artifact that you're creating is a 2/2, I think is very relevant. So I'm going to try it as kind of like a support card, essentially, for TPI and Saheeli and other artifact synergies in my blue-red section. That being said, I think that if you're playing small gold sections, even if you're supporting artifacts in your environments, I think this probably doesn't quite get there for me. But with a large enough gold section, I think that this is hopefully going to support those cards really effectively.
Yeah, this is the kind of card that strikes me as a card that would be really powerful in also non-power max environments. So, for example, this is a card I'm really interested in our Neo Cube, which is we're trying to maintain a specific power level. And a card like this not only synergizes extremely well, but also isn't just like crazy on rate powerful. Like it's kind of middling, which puts it in line with a lot of the other cards we're running.
Yeah, the more you want your environment to be about 3 and 4 mana creatures that you are expecting to survive, to untap with, this gets way, way, way better, for sure.
Yeah. Moving on to colorless, we're going to have Nutrient Block. So it is a artifact food with indestructible and 2 tap sack, gain 3 life. And when it's put in the graveyard from the battlefield, you draw a card. And the range of playability, the range on this card seems to be rather high because Tim's got it as an F. I'm in the D range and you're in a C range.
Yeah.
So, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I mean, to me, this is like you're going to know this if you want it. So I play with Wizards, Rockets, and Chromatic Star in my environment, which are very similar to this in that they're 1-mana artifacts that when they die, you get to draw a card. They're synergy pieces for your artifact decks, especially the ones that have artifact sacrifice in them. But if you are playing a deck that has those requirements, those cards have been really, really solid. They're like always plays in those decks. So Nutrient Block in those kinds of decks is an always play. And the fact that it is then a target for your Zoetic Glyphs. Now I know, close your ears if you hate the idea of an indestructible animated artifact happening. I think that this is actually a way better or a more palatable version of that effect than, say, putting it on your artifact land when you're just playing your artifact lands anyways. You actually have to put this card in your deck and you have to draw it alongside your animation effect. So I think that I've heard people be, suggest that, I don't want to play this card because I play with artifact animation. And my argument would be, if you're afraid of a 2-card combo that then, the output of your 2 cards is a 5/4 indestructible, then I don't know. I think that might not be as oppressive as you might imagine. But as an additional point of synergy in my environment, that's very exciting. So I just see this as a better Wizards Rockets, a better Chromatic Star, and I like those cards in my environment, so I'm definitely going to play with it. But, you will know if you care about this card. All
right. And finally, the last card for our review is Dauntless Scrapbot, which is 3 mana, colorless, for a 3/1 artifact robot, and when it enters, you exile each opponent's graveyard and create a lander token. So I kind of consider this starting as probably a sideboard card most of the time, and if you're okay with sorcery speed, wipe your graveyard, which we're going to try it, partly because it's colorless, partly because the rate's not super crazy, as a graveyard hate piece that's a little more pushed. In terms of the effect, because most of our graveyard hate is like tag 1 or 2 cards. The lander gives it artifact synergies, gives it sack synergies, gives it landfall synergies. There's a lot of little things going on this card. And if this were a 3/2, I would have this as like a C+, I think, even. But at a 3/1, I am super skeptical. But I want this card to be good, and I did have a chance to draft it in my first deck in the format, and honestly, it was pretty good. It could be because I ran up against a green-black graveyard deck, and they were clearly setting up some sort of play, and then I just completely blew out their graveyard, and their head exploded, so that was cool. But I think this card's got a lot going on, which is more than we can usually say for the colorless artifact dude in a set. Usually these cards are basically unplayable.
Yeah, I mean, this is trading on the fact that colorless cards are terrible in Cube, but they are, and this one's not terrible. I agree with you totally that the only thing holding back this card is the 1 toughness. But I was looking at, I couldn't find a modern playable Peasant 3-drop artifact that makes 2 artifacts on ETB. And so just for that alone, this being a nice synergy piece for your artifact decks, makes it really intriguing. The fact that you could play this theoretically in your Landfall Matters archetype. And yes, it is obviously a really solid sideboard card. So this clearly gets there for me as a colorless card, given the bar for colorless cards are so low. But God, I hate 3-1 for 3 mana. That bar really does. It's like they really couldn't have given us the 3-2. It would have been really good at 3-2. But that is sad.
Yeah.
That definitely holds it back. But yeah, I think it definitely gets there for my colors section.
Yeah, I think once you get past Circuit Mender and Mishra's Bauble, the colorless section starts going downhill really quickly. Like there's Glimmer. Obviously, I like Glimmerlight. I like Bandit's Hull. I think these are fine cards. And there's like cards like Mortar Pod, Scrabbling Claws, Ginger Brute. These all have homes. But the bar to get into the colorless section of current arena level cubes is just it's not crazy high. So yeah, being able to make 2 artifacts is really good.
Yep, agreed.
All right, well, folks, that'll wrap us up. We're again wishing Tim a swift recovery because he is much better at this than we are in terms of guiding us and hosting the show. That being said, you can check out our socials on twitter.com/JankDiverGaming, youtube.com/JankDiverGaming. You can join the Jank Diver Discord from wherever you're listening to this podcast. I stream on twitch.tv/Teld Talks, and you can find Daneelius over in the limited level up server, as well as our own Discord if you want to talk Peasant Cube with him. You have anything you want to say in closing here, Daneelius? As this, we've already talked about in our mainline episode how our thoughts on the set and all that, but if you want to say your piece here, this is a final opportunity for you to do that.
Yeah, I like the set a lot, and I think that it's unfortunate I haven't really been compelled by the retail environment. I think it's just another set in a long line, honestly, over the last year or so that haven't really captured my attention for retail drafting. But for Cube, I think there's a lot of cool stuff here. I think Warp is a fascinating ability, and I'm adding a lot of Warp cards this time around. It's gotten me excited about Soul Hoarder again. There's tons of artifacts and artifact synergy cards all over the place, which is awesome for my environment. So I think this is one of the sets I'm most excited about over the last year, I'd say, that doesn't include, say, MH3. So yeah, very cool set. And I'll say that it couldn't have come at a better time because it looks like Spider-Man is going to be a huge dud is what my current prediction is. So we might be 4 months away from the next really impactful Cube set coming to, or for Peasant. So yeah, try a lot of these cards out, get excited for them because they might be all we get for quite some time.
Yeah, especially given that set's going to be, I believe, substantially smaller than a normal set, right?
Yep, small, and it just kind of there's a couple cool abilities they've spoiled, but overall it doesn't look particularly powerful, and it's small, so yeah, not super excited about its Cube relevance, but I think there's a lot to be excited about for Edge of Eternities.
All right, folks, that's gonna end this. I'm sure Tim will do some editing to make this sound better, but goodbye.
Thanks, Tim.
Nope, you guys nailed it. I got nothing.